Hello everyone, I am Mano Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. My name is Kenneth Young, and I am 29 years old. This happened in the Cranberry Wilderness of West Virginia, deep in the heart of the Monongahela National Forest, where the ancient mountains keep their darkest secrets buried in shadow and stone. Michael Williams had been my best friend since college, and when he suggested we tackle the remote Highland Scenic Highway trail system for a 3-day backpacking trip, I couldn't refuse. We'd been planning this for months, a chance to disconnect from our desk jobs and reconnect with something primal. Mike worked in IT, constantly hunched over servers and code, while I spent my days as a claims adjuster, drowning in paperwork and phone calls. We both needed this escape. The plan was simple. Start at the Williams River trailhead, hike deep into the backcountry toward the remote Cranberry Glades, then circle back through some of the most isolated terrain in the eastern United States. 3 days, 2 nights, just us and the wilderness. Looking back, I should have paid attention to the warnings. The old-timer at the Richwood gas station had given us a strange look when we mentioned our destination. "Cranberry Glades, huh?" he'd said, his weathered hands pausing as he counted our change. "You boys be careful out there. Things ain't always what they seem in them hollows." Mike had laughed it off. What's that supposed to mean? The man's eyes had gone distant. Been stories about that area since before my granddaddy's time. Cherokee used to call it the Hollow of Whispers. Said something lived in them bogs that weren't natural. Course, most folks don't believe in such things anymore. We'd thanked him and left, chuckling about local superstitions as we drove toward the trailhead. But his words stuck with me, creating a small knot of unease in my stomach that I couldn't quite shake. The first day started perfectly. October in West Virginia was stunning. The hardwood forest blazed with reds and golds, and the crisp mountain air filled our lungs as we hiked deeper into the wilderness. Mike was in his element, constantly stopping to photograph the scenery with his expensive camera. He'd become something of a nature photography enthusiast over the past year, part of what he called his digital detox lifestyle. "This is exactly what we needed," he said around noon, as we stopped for lunch beside a crystal-clear stream. "No emails, no notifications, no bullshit. Just this." I nodded, biting into my trail mix. The silence was profound. No traffic, no machinery, just the gentle babble of water over stones and the whisper of wind through dying leaves. For the first time in months, I felt truly relaxed. But as the afternoon wore on, subtle things began to feel wrong. It started with the wildlife. The forest had been alive with birdsong when we began hiking, but as we climbed higher into the mountains, the sounds gradually faded. By mid-afternoon, an oppressive silence had settled over everything. Even our footsteps seemed muffled as if the very air was absorbing sound. "Weird how quiet it's gotten," Mike observed, echoing my thoughts. "Maybe we're just getting into higher elevation," I suggested, though I didn't really believe it. Then there were the trees. Some of the older hardwoods bore strange scars, deep gouges in the bark that looked almost like claw marks, but far too large to have been made by any bear. The marks were fresh, the exposed wood still pale and bleeding sap. "What do you think made these?" Mike asked, running his fingers along one of the gouges. The mark extended nearly 8 feet up the trunk. "Probably just storm damage," I said, though the cuts were too clean, too deliberate. As evening approached, we reached our planned campsite, a small clearing beside Williams River, about 12 miles from the nearest road. The isolation was complete. We might as well have been on another planet. Mike set about making camp with his usual efficiency, while I gathered firewood from the surrounding forest. That's when I found the bones. They were scattered in a small depression about 50 yards from our campsite, hidden beneath a pile of rotting leaves. At first glance, they looked like deer remains, probably a winter kill that had been picked clean by scavengers. But as I brushed away the debris, my blood ran cold. These weren't deer bones. The skull was too large, too elongated. The teeth were wrong, canines far too prominent, molars filed or worn to sharp points. The rib cage was massive but strangely distorted, as if the bones had been stretched and reshaped. Most disturbing were the arm bones, which seemed far too long for any normal animal. And there was something else. Carved into several of the larger bones were symbols, crude scratches that might have been letters or pictographs. They looked fresh. I should have told Mike immediately. Instead, I quickly covered the bones with leaves and debris, some primal instinct warning me to keep the discovery to myself. I told myself I was being paranoid, that they were just unusual animal remains, but my hands were shaking as I gathered my firewood. Back at camp, Mike had the tent set up and was working on starting a fire. He looked up as I approached with my armload of wood. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said with a grin. "Find anything interesting out there?" "Just dead trees," I lied. "Lots of good fuel." But the fire wouldn't catch properly. No matter how we arranged the kindling or how much paper we used, the flames would sputter and die within minutes. The wood was dry enough and there was barely any wind, but something seemed to be actively preventing the fire from taking hold. "This is ridiculous," Mike muttered after the fifth failed attempt. "I could start a fire in a hurricane, but this—" Finally, after nearly an hour of trying, we managed to coax a small, weak flame to life. But even then, it burned strangely. The flames were too blue, and they seemed to cast shadows in the wrong directions. I told myself it was just the unusual mineral content in the local wood, but the sight made my skin crawl. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped rapidly. What had been a pleasantly cool evening became bone-chillingly cold, our breath misting in the air despite the season. We huddled close to our pathetic fire, eating a cold dinner of energy bars and jerky. "Listen," Mike said suddenly. I froze, straining my ears. At first, I heard nothing but the usual forest sounds: wind in the trees, the distant hoot of an owl. Then I caught it. A low, rhythmic sound, almost like chanting or singing, carried on the night air. "Probably just wind through the rocks," I suggested, though the sound was far too regular, too purposeful. "Since when does wind sound like that?" Mike countered, and he was right. The sound was distinctly vocal, multiple voices singing or chanting in some language I didn't recognize. The sound continued for nearly 10 minutes, seeming to come from different directions. Sometimes it was closer, sometimes farther away, as if the singers were moving through the forest around us. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The silence that followed was absolute and terrifying. We sat without speaking for a long time, both of us staring out into the darkness beyond our weak firelight. Every shadow seemed to move. Every sound made us jump. When we finally decided to turn in for the night, neither of us slept well. I woke several times to strange sounds: footsteps circling our tent, the rustle of something large moving through the underbrush, and once what sounded distinctly like someone calling my name from the darkness. Each time I looked out, there was nothing there, just the dying embers of our fire and the impenetrable blackness of the forest. The second day dawned gray and overcast, with a thick fog that seemed to cling to the mountains like smoke. We broke camp quickly, both of us eager to put distance between ourselves and the sight of our restless night. "Did you hear anything weird last night?" Mike asked as we shouldered our packs. "Just the usual forest sounds," I lied again. I was becoming increasingly worried about Mike's state of mind. He kept stopping to take pictures of things that weren't there: empty clearings, bare trees, shadows on rocks. When I asked him what he was photographing, he'd just smile and say he was capturing the essence of the place. The fog made navigation difficult. Our GPS units kept losing signal, and even when they worked, they showed our position as being miles from where we thought we were. The topographic maps, which had been perfectly clear the day before, now seemed confusing and contradictory. Trails that should have been there weren't, and paths we didn't remember were clearly marked. "This doesn't make sense," Mike muttered, studying his map for the third time in an hour. "According to this, we should be able to see Cranberry Glades from here, but all I see is more forest." He was right. We'd been hiking for hours, following what should have been a clear trail toward our destination, but the landscape around us remained unchanged. Endless hardwood forest stretching in every direction. It felt like we were walking in circles, though our compass bearing seemed correct. Around noon, we stopped for lunch in a small clearing that felt hauntingly familiar. As we ate, Mike's behavior became increasingly erratic. He kept glancing over his shoulder as if he could hear something I couldn't. Several times he started to say something, then stopped mid-sentence, his eyes unfocused. "You okay, buddy?" I asked. "Fine," he said, but his voice was distant. "Just, do you ever feel like you're being watched?" The question sent a chill down my spine, because I had been feeling exactly that all morning. The sensation of unseen eyes following our every move had been growing stronger with each passing hour. Every time I turned around, I expected to see someone standing in the trees behind us, but there was never anything there. "It's just the isolation getting to us," I said, trying to convince myself as much as him. 2 days without seeing another human being. It's natural to feel a bit paranoid. But even as I said it, I knew it was more than that. Something was actively wrong with this place. That's when Mike disappeared. We'd been hiking for about an hour after lunch when he announced he needed to step off the trail to relieve himself. "I'll just be a minute," he said, ducking behind a cluster of large boulders about 20 feet from where I was standing. I waited, and waited. After 5 minutes, I called his name. No response. After 10 minutes, I walked over to where he'd gone, expecting to find him suffering from some digestive issue or perhaps injured from a fall. He wasn't there. I searched frantically, calling his name and pushing through the underbrush in ever-widening circles. There was no sign of him anywhere, no footprints, no disturbed vegetation, nothing. It was as if he'd simply vanished into thin air. Panic set in. I shouted until my voice was hoarse, then used the emergency whistle on my pack until my lungs burned. The sounds echoed off the mountains and died away into silence. No response, no sign of human presence anywhere. I tried my cell phone, knowing it was useless but desperate enough to try anyway. No signal, of course. My GPS was also malfunctioning, showing only static on the screen. I was completely alone in thousands of acres of wilderness, with no way to communicate with the outside world, and no idea which direction led to safety. I spent the rest of the afternoon searching, marking trees to ensure I didn't lose track of my own location. As the sun began to set, I faced a terrible decision: continue searching in the dark or make camp and resume looking for Mike in the morning. The rational choice was obvious, but the thought of abandoning my friend, even temporarily, made me sick. In the end, exhaustion and the approaching darkness forced my hand. I set up my tent in the same clearing where Mike had vanished, hoping he might find his way back during the night. I didn't sleep at all. Every sound made me bolt upright, hoping it was Mike returning. But the sounds that came from the forest that night were not made by any human being. It started around midnight with that same rhythmic chanting we'd heard the night before, but this time it was much closer. The voices seemed to circle my tent, sometimes coming so near I was certain someone was standing just outside the thin nylon walls. The chanting was in no language I recognized, full of harsh consonants and guttural sounds that seemed to scrape against the inside of my skull. Then came the footsteps. Heavy, deliberate steps that circled my camp in a slow, methodical pattern. Whatever was making them was large, much larger than a human, and it moved with predatory patience. The steps would stop directly outside my tent for long minutes at a time, and I could hear heavy breathing, or something that sounded like breathing but was too wet, too labored. The most terrifying part was the intelligence behind it. This wasn't a wild animal investigating a strange scent. Whatever was out there knew exactly what I was, and it was playing with me. Around 3 a.m., I heard Mike's voice. Ken, are you there?" I'm hurt, man. I need help." The voice was coming from somewhere in the forest, faint but unmistakably Mike's. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped my tent, relief flooding through me despite the circumstances. "Mike, where are you?" "Over here. Follow my voice." I fell and I think my leg is broken. I stumbled out of my tent and swept my flashlight beam across the forest. The light seemed strangely weak, barely penetrating the darkness beyond a few feet. "Keep talking, Mike. I'm coming." "Hurry, Ken. It's so cold. I can't feel my legs." I followed the voice deeper into the forest, crashing through underbrush and stumbling over fallen logs. Mike's voice led me on for what felt like hours, always just ahead, always just out of reach. It wasn't until I stopped to catch my breath that I realized something was wrong. Mike's voice was coming from directly above me. I looked up, and my blood froze. Perched in the branches of a massive oak tree, about 30 feet off the ground, was a shape that might once have been human. It was calling to me in Mike's voice, but even in the dim beam of my flashlight I could see it was horribly wrong. The thing was emaciated to the point of being skeletal, its limbs far too long for its torso. Its skin was pale and stretched tight, and its fingers ended in what looked like claws. But the worst part was the face, or what remained of it. The features were a grotesque parody of Mike's, stretched and distorted as if someone had tried to reshape clay into human form without quite remembering what humans looked like. "Ken," it said in Mike's voice, turning its head toward me with a wet, grinding sound. "Why did you leave me? I called for you. I called and called, but you never came." I ran. I crashed through the forest in blind panic, branches tearing at my clothes and face. Behind me, I could hear the thing dropping from the tree and pursuing me, its footsteps no longer heavy and deliberate but quick and skittering, like some massive insect. Mike's voice followed me, pleading and accusing. "Don't leave me again, Ken. Come back. We're supposed to be friends." I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out, finally collapsing beside a small stream. The sounds of pursuit had stopped, but I didn't trust the silence. I huddled against a fallen log, my flashlight clutched in my trembling hands, and waited for dawn. When the sun finally rose, I was horrified to discover I was less than 100 yards from my campsite. I'd run in a complete circle. My tent was still there, but something had been through my supplies. My food was scattered around the clearing, and my sleeping bag had been pulled from the tent and shredded. Worse, there were tracks everywhere. The same elongated footprints I'd seen around the bone pile, but fresh and clear in the soft earth. They circled my tent dozens of times, and some led directly to where I was now hiding. I knew I had to get out of there. Without Mike, my chances of survival were slim, but staying in this place meant certain death. I gathered what supplies I could salvage, stuffed them into my pack, and started hiking in what I hoped was the direction of the nearest road. The forest felt different in daylight, but not in a good way. The trees seemed to loom larger, their branches intertwining overhead to block out most of the sky. The fog had lifted, but an unnatural twilight persisted, as if the sun couldn't quite penetrate the canopy. And I wasn't alone. I could feel eyes on me constantly, and occasionally caught glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision. When I turned to look, there was never anything there, but I knew something was following me. Sometimes I could hear footsteps matching my pace, staying just out of sight. Worse, I began to hear Mike's voice again, calling to me from different directions. Sometimes he sounded injured and desperate, sometimes angry and accusatory. Each time I forced myself to ignore it and keep walking, but the temptation to answer was almost overwhelming. Hours passed in this nightmarish routine. My water was running low, and I had no idea if I was going in the right direction. The landscape around me remained stubbornly unchanged. The same dense forest, the same twisted trees, the same oppressive atmosphere. It was late afternoon when I saw the cabin. It appeared suddenly in a small clearing, as if it had materialized from the forest itself. The structure was old but seemed solid, built from local timber and stone. Smoke was rising from the chimney, and warm light glowed in the windows. After 2 days of isolation and terror, the sight of human habitation filled me with overwhelming relief. I approached cautiously, calling out as I walked. "Hello? Is anyone there? I need help." The front door opened and Mike stepped out. He looked exactly as he had when we'd started our trip. Clean, well-rested, wearing the same clothes. He smiled and waved as if nothing unusual had happened. "Ken, there you are. I've been waiting for you." Every instinct I had screamed at me to run, but exhaustion and hope made me hesitate. This looked like Mike, sounded like Mike. Maybe everything else had been some kind of stress-induced hallucination. Maybe there was a simple explanation for his disappearance. "Mike, where the hell have you been? I've been looking for you for—" "Come inside," he interrupted, his smile never wavering. "I have something to show you." That's when I noticed his eyes. They were the right color, the right shape, but they were completely empty. There was no recognition there, no warmth, no humanity. It was like looking into the eyes of a mannequin. "You're not Mike," I whispered. The thing wearing my friend's face tilted its head to one side, farther than any human neck should bend. "Of course I'm Mike. Who else would I be?" I backed away slowly, my hand moving to the knife on my belt. "What did you do with him?" "I didn't do anything with him." The Mike thing's voice was changing, becoming deeper, more guttural. "I am him, just improved." The transformation began as I watched. The skin on its face started to stretch and distort, the features flowing like melted wax, the body elongated, joints bending in impossible directions. Within seconds, I was facing the same skeletal horror I'd seen in the tree, but now it was speaking in a voice that shifted between Mike's familiar tones and something else entirely. "You left me, Ken," it hissed. "When I called for help, you left me. But it's okay. I understand now. I understand what this place really is." I drew my knife and held it in front of me, though I knew it would be useless against this thing. "Stay back," it laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You can't hurt me, Ken. I'm not really here. None of this is real. Don't you understand? This whole place exists between spaces, between what is and what might be." The Cherokee knew. That's why they avoided it. The thing that had been Mike began to circle me, moving with that same skittering gait I'd heard in the forest. "But you can join me. It's not so bad once you stop fighting it. You just have to let go of who you were." I feinted, left, and ran right, sprinting for the forest. Behind me, the cabin vanished like a mirage, and Mike's voice rose to a shriek that echoed off the mountains. "You can't leave. There is no leaving. This place doesn't let go." I ran harder than I ever had in my life, crashing through underbrush and leaping over fallen logs. The thing pursued me, its inhuman shrieks filling the air, but gradually the sounds faded behind me. I ran until I couldn't run anymore, then walked until I could barely stand. Just as darkness was falling again, I stumbled onto a dirt road. I followed it for hours, not caring where it led as long as it took me away from that cursed place. Near midnight, I saw the lights of a small town in the distance. Richwood, the same place where we'd stopped for gas at the beginning of our trip. The state police found me collapsed on the side of Route 39, dehydrated and delirious. They took me to the hospital, where I spent 3 days under observation. When I was finally coherent enough to tell my story, they organized a search and rescue operation. They never found Mike. The search team scoured the area for weeks using helicopters, tracking dogs, and experienced wilderness experts. They found our original campsite, abandoned just as I'd left it. They found the clearing where Mike had vanished, but they found no trace of him, no sign that he'd ever been there at all. The official report listed him as missing, presumed dead due to exposure or animal attack. His family held a memorial service. I was the only one who knew the truth, that something far worse than death had claimed him in those haunted mountains. I've never been back to West Virginia. I've never been camping again. Even the thought of dense forest makes my skin crawl and my hands shake. But sometimes, usually late at night when I'm alone, I hear Mike's voice calling to me from somewhere far away. Ken, are you there? I'm still waiting for you. The doctors say it's post-traumatic stress, that my mind is playing tricks on me. They've given me medications and therapy and coping strategies. None of them work because they don't understand what I know to be true. That place, that hollow between worlds, is still out there, and Mike is still there too, or what's left of him. Changed, twisted, but still calling for his friend to come back and join him in the darkness. Sometimes, in my weakest moments, I almost want to answer. The Cherokee were right to avoid the hollow of whispers. Some places are meant to remain empty, untouched by human feet. Some hungers are too ancient and terrible to comprehend. And some friendships are too strong to break, even when one friend has become something that should not exist. I know Mike is still out there, waiting in that space between reality and nightmare, and I know that someday he'll find a way to come looking for me. After all, what are friends for? My name is David Jones, and I am 34 years old. This happened in the Dolly Sods Wilderness area, deep in the Monongahela National Forest of West Virginia, during what was supposed to be a simple 3-day camping trip with my coworkers from the accounting firm. I should have known something was wrong when Marcus Reed started talking about the old stories his grandmother used to tell. We were sitting around the fire on our first night about 6 miles into the wilderness from the Forest Route 75 trailhead, and Marcus, who never talked about anything more personal than quarterly reports, suddenly got this distant look in his eyes. "My grandmother grew up around here," he said, poking at the fire with a stick. "Before they made it a wilderness area. She used to say the ground was cursed. Too many people went hungry here, she said. During the bad winters, during the war." "Which war?" asked Jennifer Williams, our office manager. She was trying to keep things light, but I could hear the unease in her voice. The way Marcus was talking, it was like he was in a trance. "All of them," Marcus said quietly. "Civil War, both world wars, Korea. Families would come up here to hunt when times got desperate. Some of them never came back down. She said the hunger got into the ground itself." Gary Mitchell, our IT guy, laughed nervously. "Come on, man. You're creeping us out." But Marcus wasn't laughing. He was staring into the fire like he could see something in the flames. "She said you could tell when the hunger was awake. Said the animals would act strange, birds would stop singing, and if you listened real careful at night, you could hear it calling." "Hear what calling?" I asked, despite myself. Marcus looked at me then, and his eyes were completely serious. The thing that used to be people. I should have suggested we pack up right then. Should have made some excuse about work, about Jennifer's bad knee, about Gary's obvious discomfort with sleeping outdoors. But I didn't. I was the one who'd organized this trip, who'd convinced everyone we needed some team building away from the office. I couldn't back down now. That first night passed without incident, though I found myself lying awake listening to the sounds of the forest. The normal sounds, wind through the trees, the distant hoot of an owl, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. But underneath it all, I could swear I heard something else. A low, rhythmic sound, almost like breathing, coming from somewhere deep in the woods. When I mentioned it to the others in the morning, they said they hadn't heard anything unusual, but I noticed Jennifer kept glancing over her shoulder as we broke camp, and Gary seemed jumpy, startling every time a branch snapped under someone's foot. We'd planned to hike deeper into the wilderness on our second day, following the old railroad grade toward bare rocks. The trail was well marked, and according to my GPS, it should have been an easy 5-mile hike to our next campsite. But something was wrong with the technology from the start. My GPS kept losing signal, showing our position jumping erratically across the map. Jennifer's phone, which had shown 2 bars the night before, was completely dead, not just out of battery, but dead, like something had fried the circuits. Gary's expensive hiking watch, which was supposed to have a built-in compass and altimeter, was spinning wildly, unable to get a fix on magnetic north. "Must be the mineral deposits," Gary said, but he didn't sound convinced. "Iron ore, maybe? Could interfere with the electronics." We pressed on anyway, following the old trail markers and what remained of the railroad grade. But after 2 hours of hiking, we came to a section where the trail simply stopped. Not like it had been washed out or overgrown, but like it had never existed at all. Where my topographic map clearly showed the railroad grade continuing straight ahead, there was nothing but dense forest. "Did we take a wrong turn?" Jennifer asked, checking her own map against mine. We hadn't. We'd been following the same trail all morning, the same trail that was clearly marked on every map we had. But now it was gone, as if the forest had simply erased it. "We'll backtrack," I decided. "Find where we went wrong." But when we turned around, the trail behind us was gone too. The forest looked the same mix of red spruce and mountain laurel, the same moss-covered rocks, the same afternoon light filtering through the canopy. But there was no trail, no sign that anyone had ever walked this way before. The four of us stood in a small clearing, surrounded by trees that seemed to press closer with each passing minute. "This is impossible," Gary said, his voice cracking slightly. "Trails don't just disappear." Marcus was quiet, studying the trees around us with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "We need to find water," he said finally. "Follow any stream downhill. It'll lead us back to civilization eventually." It was good advice, practical advice. We found a small creek about a quarter mile to the east and began following it downstream. But as the afternoon wore on, I started to notice things that didn't make sense. We passed the same fallen log 3 times, even though we'd been walking in a straight line. The creek seemed to be flowing uphill in places, defying gravity. And the shadows were all wrong, too long for the time of day, pointing in directions that had nothing to do with where the sun was positioned. We made camp that night in a small clearing beside the creek, though none of us felt like we'd gotten any closer to finding our way out. The fire wouldn't start properly, no matter what we tried. The wood was dry, the kindling was good, but the flames kept guttering out, as if something was sucking the oxygen away. When we finally got a small fire going, the smoke didn't rise. It hung heavy around our campsite, stinging our eyes and making it hard to breathe. "Something's wrong with this place," Jennifer said quietly. She was sitting on a log, her knees drawn up to her chest, staring into the weak flames. "I can feel it. Like we're being watched." "It's just the stress," I said, but I didn't believe it myself. I could feel it too, a presence in the woods around us, something patient and hungry and very, very old. Gary had been unusually quiet all evening, sitting apart from the rest of us, staring off into the trees. When I called his name, he didn't respond at first. Then, slowly, he turned to look at me, and his expression was empty. Not scared, not confused, just empty, like someone had reached inside his head and scooped out everything that made him Gary. "Are you okay?" I asked. He smiled, but it was wrong somehow, too wide, lasting too long. "I'm fine," he said, "just tired." But when he said it, his voice was different, flatter, like he was reading words from a script he didn't understand. We took turns keeping watch that night. During my shift, from midnight to 2 a.m., I heard the breathing again, that low, rhythmic sound coming from the darkness beyond our firelight. But this time, it seemed closer, and underneath it, so faint I almost missed it, I could hear something else, a wet, tearing sound, like meat being pulled apart. When Gary relieved me for the next watch, he moved differently. His walk was too careful, too measured, like he was concentrating on each step. And when he smiled at me, I saw that his teeth were stained with something dark. "Get some sleep," he said in that same flat voice. "Big day tomorrow." I tried to sleep, but couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. Around 4 a.m., I gave up and sat up in my sleeping bag, looking around the campsite. Jennifer was curled up near the dying fire, snoring softly. Marcus was in his tent, presumably asleep. And Gary was gone. I got up quietly and looked around the clearing. His sleeping bag was empty but unzipped from the inside, like he'd gotten up voluntarily. There were no signs of struggle, no drag marks, nothing to indicate he'd been taken. He'd simply left. I considered waking the others, but something made me hesitate. A sound from the woods. Footsteps, but wrong somehow. Too heavy and with an odd rhythm, like someone walking who'd forgotten how feet were supposed to work. Gary stepped back into the firelight and I almost cried out with relief. But as he got closer, I realized why the footsteps had sounded wrong. He was favoring his left leg, dragging it slightly, and his left arm hung limp at his side. And his face. His face was Gary's face, but it didn't fit right anymore. Like someone had taken it off and put it back on, slightly crooked. His left eye sat a little too low, and his mouth was pulled up in a permanent half-smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Couldn't sleep," he said when he saw me watching. But his voice was different again. Not just flat, but somehow layered, like multiple people speaking in unison but slightly out of sync. "Where did you go?" I whispered. "Just for a walk," he said, settling back into his sleeping bag. "Needed to clear my head." But as he lay down, I saw something that made my blood freeze. Dark stains on the back of his shirt and hanging from his hair, caught in the firelight. Small white fragments that looked suspiciously like bone. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. When morning came, Gary seemed more like himself again. The asymmetry in his face was less pronounced, his movements more natural. I started to wonder if I'd imagined the whole thing, if the stress and fear had made me paranoid, but then Jennifer pointed out that her backpack was missing. "I left it right here," she said, pointing to a spot near her sleeping bag. "All my food, my water purification tablets, everything." We searched the campsite thoroughly but found no trace of the pack. It was as if it had simply vanished during the night. "Maybe an animal took it," Marcus suggested, but he sounded doubtful. Bears might go after food, but they wouldn't carry off an entire backpack without leaving some trace. Gary was helpful in the search, almost aggressively so. He crawled through underbrush, checked every possible hiding spot, called out suggestions, but I noticed he never actually looked in any of the places he suggested. And when Jennifer mentioned that her water purification tablets had been in the missing pack, he got this strange expression, almost like he was pleased. We decided to continue following the creek downstream, hoping it would lead us to the Dry Fork River and from there back to civilization. But as we hiked, I started noticing things about Gary that made my skin crawl. He was walking differently. Not the injured gait from the night before, but with a predatory fluidity that was completely unlike his usual clumsy shuffle. And he kept sniffing the air, like he was tracking something. Around noon, we stopped for a rest in a small meadow. Jennifer was getting dehydrated. Without her purification tablets, she'd been reluctant to drink from the creek, and we were running low on bottled water. She was pale and shaky, clearly struggling. "I'll scout ahead," Gary offered, "see if I can find a better source of water." Before any of us could object, he disappeared into the trees. He was gone for 2 hours. When he finally returned, he was carrying a plastic water bottle, Jennifer's water bottle, the one that had been in her missing backpack. "Found this caught in some branches about a mile downstream," he said, handing it to her. "Must have been washed away." Jennifer took the bottle gratefully and drank deeply, but I was watching Gary's face and I saw the same pleased expression again, like he was savoring a private joke. Within an hour, Jennifer started getting sick. It started as nausea, then stomach cramps, then violent vomiting. She was burning up with fever, delirious, mumbling about things moving in the shadows. Marcus and I did what we could for her, but without medical supplies, we were helpless. Gary offered to help, but every time he came near her, she got worse. "Don't let him touch me," she whispered to me during a brief, lucid moment. "There's something wrong with his smell, like rotting meat." By evening, Jennifer was unconscious. Her breathing was shallow and ragged, and her skin had taken on a grayish pallor. Marcus wanted to try to carry her out, but she was dead weight, and we still had no idea which direction to go. "We need to make a decision," Gary said as we sat around the fire. "We can't all die out here." There was something in his tone that made me look at him sharply. He was staring at Jennifer's still form with an expression I couldn't quite read. Hungry, maybe? Anticipatory. "What are you suggesting?" Marcus asked. Gary shrugged. "I'm just saying, she's slowing us down. And if she dies anyway..." He trailed off, but the implication was clear. "We're not leaving her," I said firmly. Gary smiled that wrong smile again. "Of course not. I'm just thinking practically." But that night, during Gary's watch, Jennifer disappeared. I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of Marcus calling her name. Her sleeping bag was empty, unzipped from the inside just like Gary's had been the night before. But this time, there were drag marks in the dirt leading away from the campsite. "She must have wandered off," Gary said when we confronted him. "The fever, you know. People get delirious. They do strange things." But the drag marks told a different story. They showed that someone had been pulled, not walking, but dragged, away from the camp. And they led in the direction Gary had gone on his scouting trip the day before. Marcus wanted to follow the trail immediately, but Gary convinced him to wait until dawn. "We'll just get lost in the dark," he argued. "Better to wait until we can see properly." I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear that wet, tearing sound again, coming from somewhere in the direction Jennifer had been taken. And Gary. Gary sat by the fire, humming softly to himself, occasionally glancing in the same direction with that pleased expression. When dawn came, we followed the drag marks. They led through dense undergrowth, over fallen logs, deeper into the wilderness than we'd been before. After about a mile, they stopped at the edge of a small ravine. At the bottom of the ravine, partially hidden by fallen leaves, were Jennifer's clothes. Just her clothes, torn and blood-soaked, but empty. No body, no bones, nothing else. Marcus stared down at the clothes, his face white with shock. What? What could have done this? I was watching Gary, and I saw him lick his lips. Just once, quickly, like he was savoring the memory of a good meal. "Animal attack," Gary said. "Bear, maybe, or a big cat. They sometimes drag their prey away to eat it." But there were no paw prints around the ravine, no claw marks on the nearby trees, and the way Jennifer's clothes were torn, it wasn't from claws, it was from teeth, human teeth. That's when I knew for certain what Gary had become. We climbed down into the ravine to search for any other trace of Jennifer, though I think we all knew we wouldn't find anything. Gary was helping with the search, but I noticed he stayed well away from Jennifer's torn clothes, like they might contaminate him somehow. Marcus found something else, though. Tucked under a fallen log, almost hidden, a small pile of white fragments. Bones, picked clean, some of them clearly human, and, among them, glinting in the dappled sunlight, Jennifer's wedding ring. "Oh, God," Marcus whispered, backing away from the pile. "Oh, God, oh, God." Gary was immediately beside him, putting a comforting hand on his shoulder. "It's okay," he said in that flat, wrong voice. "She's not suffering anymore." But when Gary touched him, Marcus jerked away like he'd been burned. He looked at Gary with dawning horror, then at me. "It's him," Marcus said quietly. "It's been him all along." Gary's smile faltered for the first time since the night before. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The water bottle," Marcus said, his voice getting stronger. "You knew exactly where to find it, and Jennifer getting sick right after she drank from it. And now this." He gestured at the pile of bones. Gary's expression shifted, becoming something cold and predatory. "Careful, Marcus. The woods are dangerous. Accidents happen." Marcus turned to run, but Gary was faster than any human had a right to be. He caught Marcus before he'd taken 3 steps, wrapping his arms around him from behind. And then I heard the most horrible sound, the wet crack of bones breaking. Marcus screamed once, a high, thin sound that echoed off the ravine walls. Then Gary's hand clamped over his mouth and the scream was cut off. I could hear Marcus trying to breathe through his nose, making desperate whimpering sounds. "Nothing personal," Gary said conversationally, and his voice was completely different now, deeper, with an odd resonance that seemed to come from somewhere else. "But I'm still so very hungry." I ran. I crashed through the underbrush, branches tearing at my clothes and face, not caring about direction or noise or anything except getting away from the thing that had been wearing Gary's face. Behind me, I could hear Marcus's muffled screams getting weaker, then stopping altogether. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out, then crawled behind a fallen tree and tried to catch my breath. In the distance, I could hear something crashing through the forest after me. Something that moved too fast, too fluidly, making sounds no human throat should be able to produce. It was calling my name. "David," it said in Gary's voice, but wrong, layered with harmonics that made my teeth ache. "David, where are you? Marcus is hurt. He needs help." I pressed myself against the rotting log, trying to make myself as small as possible. The footsteps were getting closer, and with them came a smell. The sweet, cloying stench of decay and something else, something that made my stomach turn. "I know you're close," the thing said, and now it wasn't even pretending to be Gary anymore. The voice was hungry, patient, ancient. "I can smell your fear. It's been so long since I've had fresh meat. So long since someone wandered into my territory." The footsteps stopped, very close to where I was hiding. I could hear it breathing, that same rhythmic sound I'd been hearing since the first night, but louder now, more deliberate. "You know what I am, don't you?" it said. "Your friend Marcus figured it out in the end, right before I opened him up and ate his heart while it was still beating." I bit down on my hand to keep from making any sound, tasting blood. "The old woman was right, you know. You, Gary's grandmother. The hunger is in the ground here. Has been for over a century. All those people who came up here when times were hard, when winter was long, when the war made food scarce. Some of them survived by eating things they shouldn't have eaten. And when you eat human flesh in a place like this, a place where the barriers are thin, sometimes the hunger eats you back." The thing that had been Gary laughed, a sound like grinding bones. Gary was so easy. All it took was a little cut on his hand while he was gathering firewood that first night. Just a drop of my blood mixed with his and I was inside, wearing him like a comfortable old coat. I heard the footsteps moving away, circling around the fallen log. It was hunting me, taking its time, savoring the chase. "I've been hungry for so long," it continued. "Decades since anyone was foolish enough to camp this deep in the wilderness. I was starting to think I'd starve. But then you came along, you and your little office friends, and I knew I'd have enough meat to last me through another winter." The footsteps stopped directly above where I was hiding. "Found you." I rolled away from the log just as something that had once been Gary but was now much larger dropped down where I'd been crouched. In the fading light, I could see what it really looked like. Gary's face stretched over a frame that was too tall, too thin, with joints that bent in the wrong directions. Its hands were tipped with claws that had grown through what remained of Gary's fingernails, and its mouth was full of teeth that were too sharp, too many. I ran again, but I was exhausted, stumbling over roots and rocks in the growing darkness. Behind me, I could hear the thing pursuing, no longer bothering to be quiet. It moved through the forest like it owned it, like every tree and stone was part of its body. I don't know how long I ran. Time seemed to stretch and compress in impossible ways. The moon was full overhead, but its light seemed wrong, too bright, casting shadows that moved independently of their objects. And in those shadows, I could see other shapes moving. Other hungry things that had been waiting in the deep places of the forest. Finally, I stumbled into a clearing I recognized, our original campsite from the first night. The fire ring was still there, cold now, full of ash and charred wood. And beyond it, impossibly, I could see lights through the trees. Electric lights. Civilization. I ran toward the lights, gasping with relief. But as I got closer, I realized they weren't electric lights at all. They were fires. Dozens of small fires scattered through the forest, each one burning with that same wrong light as the moon. And around each fire I could see shapes that might once have been human, all of them watching me with eyes that reflected the flames. The thing wearing Gary's face stepped into the clearing behind me. "Welcome to my family," it said. "Some of them have been here since the Civil War. Others are more recent additions. They all came looking for food when times were hard. They all found me instead." The shapes around the fires began to move closer, their movements jerky and unnatural. I could see them more clearly now. Men and women in various states of decay, some still wearing the rotted remnants of period clothing, others naked and changed beyond easy recognition. All of them were hungry. "You have a choice," the Gary thing said. "You can run and let my family hunt you. Or you can join us willingly. Let me cut you. Let a little of my blood mix with yours, and you'll never be hungry again. Never be alone, never die." I looked around the clearing at the assembled horrors, at the fires that cast no real warmth, at the thing that had consumed my friends and was wearing their faces like masks. And I made my choice. I ran straight at the Gary thing, catching it off guard. We went down in a tangle, rolling across the cold ashes of our old fire. It was stronger than me, much stronger, but I had surprise on my side. I managed to grab a half-burned piece of firewood and drove it into what remained of Gary's face. The thing screamed. Not with Gary's voice, but with something that sounded like a winter wind through dead trees. Black blood poured from the wound, hissing where it hit the ground. The other creatures around the fires howled in response, a chorus of inhuman voices that made my bones ache. I ran again, and this time in the direction I thought might lead back to the trailhead. Behind me, I could hear the Gary thing giving chase, but it was slower now, hurt. The other creatures were following too, but they seemed reluctant to leave their fires. I ran through the night, guided by some instinct I didn't understand. Every time I thought I was lost, I'd catch a glimpse of something familiar. A tree I remembered, a rock formation, a bend in a stream. The forest was letting me go, for reasons I couldn't fathom. As dawn broke, I stumbled out of the tree line onto Forest Route 75. My car was still there, covered in dew but intact. I drove straight to the nearest town, a place called Davis, and called the state police. They organized a search party, of course, sent helicopters and tracking dogs and experienced wilderness guides into the dolly sods to look for my missing co-workers. They found our original campsite, and the second one where Jennifer had gotten sick. They found some scattered camping gear and Jennifer's torn clothes at the bottom of the ravine. But they never found any bodies, and they never found the clearing with the fire rings, or any sign of the things that lived around them. The official report listed Gary Mitchell, Jennifer Williams, and Marcus Reed as missing, presumed dead due to exposure and possible animal attack. The case is still open, technically, but no one's actively investigating anymore. I tried to tell them the truth at first, but when I mentioned the creature that had been wearing Gary's face, the blood that hissed and burned, the other things gathered around their fires, they started looking at me like I was suffering from trauma-induced hallucinations. Maybe they were right. Maybe the stress and isolation got to me, and I invented the supernatural elements to cope with whatever really happened out there. Maybe Gary really did snap and kill the others before wandering off to die in the wilderness. Maybe I'm the one who's crazy. But sometimes, late at night, I'll get a phone call. No one speaks, but I can hear breathing on the other end. That same rhythmic sound I heard in the forest. and sometimes very faintly I can hear Gary's voice saying my name. The calls always come from numbers with a West Virginia area code, always from somewhere near the Dolly Sods Wilderness area. I've moved 3 times since then, changed my phone number twice, but the calls keep coming. Sometimes I think about going back, taking a hunting rifle and a lot of ammunition and going back to settle things once and for all. But I know that's exactly what it wants me to do. It's still hungry, after all, still patient, still waiting in the deep places of the forest for the next group of city people who think they can handle a little wilderness camping. My leg never healed right after that night. Something happened when I was running through the dark, a fall maybe, or a branch that caught me wrong. The doctors say there's nothing structurally wrong, but it aches constantly, especially when the weather changes, especially when it's very cold. Sometimes I wonder if it's more than just an injury. Sometimes I wonder if a little of that black blood got into me somehow and I'm changing slowly, bit by bit. But I try not to think about that. I try to focus on the fact that I got out. I survived when the others didn't. Even if part of me is still back there in the forest, sitting around those wrong fires, waiting for the next group of hikers to stumble into the wrong part of the wilderness. I don't go camping anymore. I don't even like being in the woods during the day. But sometimes when I'm driving through rural areas and I see a Forest Service road disappearing into the trees, I'll slow down and look. And sometimes, if the light is just right, I can see smoke rising from somewhere deep in the woods. Thin columns of it, too many to count, rising straight up into the sky like signals, like dinner bells. The hunger is still out there, still waiting, and now it knows exactly what I taste like. My name is David Jones, and I am 34 years old. This happened in the remote wilderness of the Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia, near a place locals call Seneca Rocks, though we never made it that far. I should have listened to the warnings. The clerk at the outfitter in Petersburg had that hollow look in his eyes when he asked where we were headed. When I mentioned the trail near Spruce Knob, he just shook his head and muttered something about the hungry season. But we were 5 adults from the accounting firm, eager for our annual team-building retreat. What could go wrong? My colleagues were an interesting bunch. There was Jennifer Williams, our uptight department head who insisted on bringing a GPS unit despite her complete lack of outdoors experience. Michael Brown, the office comedian who never took anything seriously until he had to. Sarah Rodriguez, quiet and observant, with a photographic memory that would prove both blessing and curse. And finally, Robert Johnson, our newest hire, a soft-spoken man with nervous habits who jumped at every shadow. We started our hike on a crisp October morning, the kind where your breath makes little clouds and the leaves crunch satisfyingly underfoot. The trail began well marked, winding through dense hardwood forest painted in brilliant reds and golds. But about 3 miles in, something felt off. It started with the silence. Not the peaceful quiet of nature, but an oppressive absence of sound that pressed against your eardrums like cotton. No birds, no insects. Even our footsteps seemed muffled, as if the forest was swallowing the sound. Sarah mentioned it first, her voice barely above a whisper. Does anyone else notice how quiet it is? We all stopped, straining to hear something, anything. The silence stretched until Michael forced a laugh that sounded grotesquely loud. Just means we're deep in the wilderness, he said, but his usual jovial tone cracked slightly. Good thing, right, no traffic, no city noise. But I felt it too, that wrongness that crawls up your spine when your primal brain screams danger even though your rational mind can't identify the threat. The trees seemed to lean inward, their branches creating a canopy so thick that despite it being midday, we were walking in perpetual twilight. By evening, we'd reached what should have been our campsite according to the map, a clearing beside a stream that our research indicated would provide fresh water. Instead, we found a grove of dead trees, their bark blackened as if by fire, though there was no smell of smoke. The stream was there, but the water ran dark and oily, with a metallic tang that made my stomach turn. "This isn't right," Jennifer said, consulting her GPS device with increasing frustration. "According to this, we should be 2 miles northeast of here." She shook the unit, pressed buttons, but the screen flickered between incomprehensible symbols and coordinates that placed us everywhere from Canada to Mexico. "Technology fails sometimes," I said, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. "We'll use the old-fashioned way, map and compass." But when Sarah spread out the topographical map, the ink seemed to shift in the fading light. Elevation lines writhed like worms, and the compass needle spun lazily before pointing to what felt like magnetic south. Robert hadn't spoken in hours. He stood at the edge of our circle, staring into the dead grove with an intensity that made my skin crawl. His breathing was shallow, rapid, the kind of hyperventilation that comes before a panic attack. "Rob," I called, "you okay?" He turned slowly, and for just a moment, his pupils seemed to catch the light wrong, reflecting it back like an animal's. "I can hear them," he whispered. "Hear what?" "The voices. They're calling my name." We all listened, but there was only that suffocating silence. Michael clapped Robert on the shoulder, perhaps a bit too hard. "Just the wind. Buddy, let's get the tent set up before it gets dark." But as we worked, I noticed things. Small things that accumulated like drops of water until they formed a flood of unease. My tent stakes, driven deep into the earth, would work loose within minutes. The camp stove's flame burned blue instead of orange, casting sickly shadows that moved independently of the light source. And when I opened my pack to retrieve my sleeping bag, the fabric was damp with a moisture that smelled of copper and decay. Sarah built our fire while Jennifer continued her futile battle with the GPS. The flames started normally enough, crackling yellow and warm. But as darkness fell, the color shifted, first to green, then to a deep violet that seemed to absorb light rather than provide it. The smoke rose straight up in the still air, forming shapes that looked almost deliberate, almost like symbols. "That's not natural," Sarah said, backing away from the fire pit. Michael laughed, but it was strained. "Come on, it's just the wood, probably some mineral content in the soil." But I could see the fear in his eyes, the same fear that was growing in all of us like a living thing. As if sensing our terror, the forest began to respond. Trees creaked and groaned without wind. Somewhere in the darkness, branches snapped with the crisp sound of bones breaking, and underneath it all, barely audible, came a sound like breathing, massive lungs filling and emptying in a rhythm just slightly off from human. We huddled closer to our unnatural fire, 5 adults reduced to children afraid of the dark. That's when Jennifer's GPS suddenly blazed to life, the screen bright enough to hurt our night-adjusted eyes. "Look at this," she said, her voice tight with hysteria. "Look at the time." The display read 3:47 a.m., but according to my watch and everyone else's, it was barely 9 o'clock. As we stared, the numbers began counting backward. 3:46, 3:45, 3:44. "It's just malfunctioning," I said, but my voice sounded hollow even to me. Robert stood abruptly, his movement so sudden we all flinched. "I need to gather more firewood," he announced. His voice was flat, emotionless, completely unlike his usual nervous cadence. "Rob, wait," I called. "We should stick together." But he was already walking into the forest, his flashlight beam swallowed by the oppressive darkness between the trees. I started to follow, but Sarah grabbed my arm. "Let him go," she whispered urgently. "Something's wrong with him. Have you noticed his eyes?" I had noticed. The way they'd begun to reflect light, the way his blinks had become less frequent, more deliberate, and his skin, pale before, it now had a waxy, translucent quality that made the veins underneath clearly visible. We waited. 5 minutes became 10, then 20. I called his name into the darkness, my voice echoing strangely as if the sound was being stretched and distorted. No response. "We have to look for him," Jennifer said, but she made no move to leave the fire's circle. In the morning, I decided, when we can see. But morning brought no relief. I woke to find my sleeping bag unzipped from the inside, though I had no memory of opening it. My boots were gone, replaced by a pair that looked identical but felt wrong, too tight, as if my feet had changed shape overnight. When I emerged from my tent, the camp looked different. Our fire pit was cold, filled with ash that moved and swirled despite the complete absence of wind, and carved into the dirt around it were symbols, crude but deliberate marks that hurt to look at directly. Robert's tent stood empty, but not just empty, violated. The fabric was slashed from within, long tears that spoke of desperate clawing. Dark stains covered the sleeping bag, and the metallic smell of blood hung thick in the air. "Jesus Christ," Michael breathed, his usual humor completely absent. Sarah was examining the symbols in the dirt, her face pale but determined. "These aren't random," she said. "There's a pattern here, like a summoning circle." "Don't be ridiculous," Jennifer snapped, but her voice shook. "Robert probably just had an accident, cut himself on something." But we all knew the quantity of blood was wrong. No simple cut could account for the dark pools that had soaked into the earth. And then there was the smell. Not just blood, but something else. Something rotten and sweet, like fruit left to decay in the sun. As we debated what to do, a figure emerged from the tree line. Robert walked toward us with measured steps, his movements too fluid, too controlled. But something was fundamentally wrong with his appearance. His clothes hung loose, as if he'd lost significant weight overnight. His skin had taken on a gray pallor, and his eyes were completely black. Not just the pupils, but the entire visible surface. "Robert," I called tentatively. He smiled, and I wished he hadn't. His teeth had grown longer, sharper, and when he opened his mouth wider, I could see that his tongue was forked like a snake's. "I found something wonderful in the woods," he said, and his voice was Robert's but wrong, like an imperfect recording played at the wrong speed. "You all need to see it." "What happened to you?" Sarah demanded, backing toward her tent. Robert tilted his head at an angle that was just slightly too far to be human. "Nothing happened to me. I happened to me. I found what I was always meant to be." He took a step closer, and I could see that his fingernails had grown into claws, black and curved like a raptor's talons. When he moved, his joints bent in ways that defied anatomy, as if extra bones had been inserted into his limbs. "Stay back," Michael warned, grabbing a tent stake as a weapon. Robert laughed, a sound like wind through dead leaves. "You still don't understand, do you? This place doesn't follow your rules. Time doesn't work here, space doesn't work here, and soon, you won't work here either." As if to demonstrate his point, I looked at my watch and saw the hands spinning backward. The sun, which should have been climbing toward noon, seemed to be setting in the east. And the trees around our campsite were moving, not swaying, but actually repositioning themselves, roots sliding through the earth like massive earthworms. "We need to leave," I said. "Now." But when we looked for the trail that had brought us here, it was gone. In its place was a wall of thorns, black and glistening with a substance that might have been sap or might have been blood. Robert followed our gaze and smiled wider. "The forest is hungry," he said. "It's been hungry for so long, and now it's feeding time." That's when he attacked. Robert moved with inhuman speed, crossing the distance between us in a single bound. His claws raked across Michael's chest, tearing through his jacket and the flesh beneath like tissue paper. Michael screamed, a sound I'd never heard him make, high and desperate and broken. I grabbed a burning branch from our unnatural fire and swung it at Robert's head. The flame flared violet as it connected, and Robert staggered backward with a shriek that sounded like metal being torn apart. But where the fire had touched him, his skin didn't burn. It cracked open like bark, revealing something dark and squirming underneath. "Run!" I shouted, though there was nowhere to go. Jennifer had her GPS out again, frantically pressing buttons as if it could somehow teleport us away from this nightmare. Sarah was helping Michael to his feet, his shirt soaked with blood but the wounds not as deep as they'd first appeared. And Robert was changing. His human facade was falling away like a shed skin. His limbs stretched and thinned, joints popping and reforming. His spine curved backward at an impossible angle, and from his shoulder blades, something that might charitably be called wings began to unfurl. Leathery membranes supported by finger-like appendages that ended in more claws. "You smell like fear," he said, and his voice was no longer even remotely human. "Fear and meat and the sweetness of ending. I'm going to enjoy taking you apart, piece by piece." The trees around us had formed a complete circle now, their branches interwoven so tightly that no light penetrated from outside. We were trapped in a natural arena with something that wore Robert's face but had become utterly alien. But Sarah, bless her observant nature, had noticed something. "The symbols," she hissed. "Look at the symbols in the dirt." The crude marks we'd found that morning were glowing now, pulsing with the same violet light as our fire. And as Robert, or the thing that had been Robert, moved around the circle, it carefully avoided stepping on them. "It can't cross the lines," she whispered. "There's some kind of barrier." But even as she spoke, the symbols were fading. Whatever power they held was weakening, and the creature knew it. It crouched at the edge of the circle, muscles bunched beneath its transformed skin, waiting for the moment when the protection would fail completely. Michael was growing pale from blood loss, and Jennifer had descended into full panic, muttering prayers and pressing buttons on her useless GPS with increasing desperation. It was up to Sarah and me to find a way out of this impossible situation. That's when I remembered something the clerk at the outfitter had said, something about the hungry season. Local folklore often contained kernels of truth, warnings passed down through generations who had learned to respect the dangers of wild places. "What do you want?" I called to the creature. It turned its black eyes toward me, and I felt like I was staring into an abyss that stared back. "I want to feed," it said. "I want to grow. I want to become." "Become what?" "Enough." Its voice was layered now, as if multiple throats were speaking in unison. "Enough to leave this place. Enough to hunt in your world of lights and roads and endless meat." The symbols were almost completely dark now. Only a few faint lines remained, and they were fading fast. But Jennifer's GPS had begun beeping frantically, and the screen was showing something that made my heart race with desperate hope. A signal. Somehow, impossibly, it was picking up a signal. "There!" Jennifer screamed, pointing to a gap between two trees that hadn't been there moments before. "The trail! It's back!" The creature let out a roar of frustration and lunged forward just as the last symbol winked out. But instead of the clear path Jennifer had indicated, I saw only more thorns, more impenetrable darkness. The GPS was lying, or being manipulated, or... Sarah grabbed my arm with painful intensity. "It's not the GPS," she said urgently. "Look at the trees. Really look." I forced myself to focus beyond my terror, to observe rather than simply react. The trees weren't solid. They were translucent, like mirages or projections, and beyond them, barely visible through the illusion, was genuine forest. Normal forest with normal shadows and normal sounds. "It's all an illusion," I breathed. "Not all of it," Sarah said grimly, as the creature that had been Robert landed in our midst with bone-jarring impact. Its claws swiped through the air where my head had been a split second before. I rolled away, came up running, and crashed directly into what felt like solid wood. The trees might be illusions, but my body couldn't pass through them. Whatever rules governed this place, they were maddeningly inconsistent. Michael was on the ground, either unconscious or worse. Jennifer had stopped pressing buttons and was now using her GPS like a club, striking at the creature whenever it came close. And Sarah, brilliant, observant Sarah, was studying the forest around us with the kind of clinical detachment that meant she was on to something. "Time," she said suddenly. It's about time. David, what time did we arrive yesterday? I don't know. Around noon? The GPS. Look at the GPS. I glanced at Jennifer's device. It read 11:47 a.m., and the date was yesterday. As I watched, the minutes began counting backward again. It's showing real time, Sarah said. Not our time. The time when this place was normal. The creature paused in its stalking, tilting its malformed head as if listening to something we couldn't hear. Clever little morsel, it hissed, but understanding doesn't equal escaping. But Sarah was already moving, circling the camp with purpose. If this place exists in a time loop, she called, then there has to be a moment when it resets. A moment when the GPS beeped. 11:46 a.m. Around us, the forest flickered like a TV with bad reception. For just an instant, I saw it as it truly was. A normal clearing beside a normal stream, with a normal trail leading back to civilization. Then, the image snapped back to our nightmare prison. 46 minutes, Sarah said. We have 46 minutes until it cycles back. But the creature was done with patience. It spread its not-quite wings and launched itself at Sarah with lethal intent. I intercepted it mid-air, tackling what had once been my co-worker to the ground. Its skin felt like cold rubber, and the smell that rose from its pores was the concentrated essence of decay. Claws raked across my back, tearing through my jacket and finding flesh. Pain exploded through my nervous system, but adrenaline kept me moving. I rolled away just as those terrible talons swept through the space where my head had been. 38 minutes, Sarah shouted. Jennifer was dragging Michael toward what she perceived as the trail exit, but from my angle I could see she was heading directly for a wall of thorns. In her panic-driven state, she couldn't see past the illusion. The creature, I had to stop thinking of it as Robert, was between me and the others, cutting off any chance of group coordination. Its black eyes reflected our violet fire, and when it smiled I could see that its mouth now extended far beyond what human anatomy would allow, creating a gaping maw lined with rows of needle teeth. You know what the worst part is, it said, advancing slowly as if savoring the moment. Robert is still in here. Still aware. He can feel everything I do with his body, but he can't control any of it. Would you like to say goodbye to him? For just a moment, the creature's expression changed. Robert's frightened eyes looked out from that monster's face, tears streaming down gray cheeks. David, he whispered in his own voice. Please, kill me. I can't stop it. It's eating my memories, my thoughts, everything that makes me, me. Then the thing was back in control, laughing at Robert's moment of desperate communication. See? He knows what's coming, and soon you'll all know. 26 minutes. I had to make a choice. Try to save Michael and Jennifer, who were stumbling blindly through an illusory landscape toward what might be safety or might be another trap. Or trust that Sarah's temporal theory was correct and try to keep the creature distracted until the reset occurred. The decision was made for me. The creature lunged again, and this time its claws found my leg. I went down hard, feeling muscle tear and bone scrape. But the pain brought clarity. Sometimes you can't save everyone. Sometimes survival means making the hardest choice of all. Sarah, I screamed, take the GPS and run. Follow the real-time countdown. She understood immediately. Grabbing the device from Jennifer's unresisting hands, she headed not for the perceived exit, but toward a section of forest that looked impenetrably dark. As she approached, I caught a glimpse of what she was seeing, the faint outline of an actual trail, visible only when viewed from the exact right angle. The creature saw her escape attempt and abandoned me to pursue more mobile prey. But its movement was wrong now, stilted and jerky as if its borrowed body was finally beginning to break down under the strain of transformation. 15 minutes, Sarah called back. I crawled after them, my injured leg sending spikes of agony through my nervous system with every movement. Behind me, I could hear Jennifer screaming as she realized the path she'd been following led nowhere. And Michael, I tried not to think about Michael. The forest around Sarah flickered more frequently now, reality and illusion bleeding into each other like watercolors in the rain. The creature was closing the distance, but each time the landscape shifted, it seemed to lose coordination, as if the changing environment disrupted its ability to navigate. 10 minutes. I could see them now. Sarah running with desperate purpose, the creature gaining ground with each loping stride. Its form had become even more distorted, barely humanoid except for the basic arrangement of limbs. Whatever Robert had become, it was continuing to evolve, adapting to this unnatural environment in ways that defied biological possibility. 5 minutes! The creature leaped, claws extended toward Sarah's back. Without thinking, I threw myself forward, tackling it from behind. We rolled together down a slope I hadn't seen moments before, branches and rocks tearing at our skin. When we came to rest at the bottom, the thing that had been Robert was on top of me, its inhuman face inches from mine. 2 minutes. Sarah's voice seemed to come from very far away. The creature's breath was like rotting meat mixed with copper pennies. Its saliva dripped onto my face, burning like acid where it touched. Those black eyes held no trace of Robert now, only hunger and ancient malevolence. "When the reset comes," it whispered, "I'll remember. I'll be waiting. And next time, I'll take you all before you even know what's happening." 1 minute. The GPS in Sarah's hands was beeping frantically. Around us, the forest was strobing between states. Normal woodland, twisted nightmare, normal woodland, twisted nightmare. The creature's form became less stable with each flicker, as if it couldn't maintain cohesion across the temporal boundaries. 30 seconds. I could see Sarah now, standing at the edge of what looked like a perfectly ordinary hiking trail. She was waving frantically for me to run, but the creature's weight pinned me to the ground. Its claws pressed against my throat, just hard enough to draw blood. 10 seconds. 9! The creature began to fade, its solid form becoming translucent. 8. 7. I could see through its body now, see the normal forest beyond. 6. 5. It was dissolving, breaking apart like smoke in a strong wind. 4. 3. 2. 1. The world went white. When my vision cleared, I was lying beside a perfectly normal stream in a perfectly normal forest clearing. Sunlight streamed through healthy green leaves, and somewhere nearby, a bird was singing. The GPS in my hand read 12:00 p.m., exactly noon, just as we'd planned to reach our campsite. Sarah was beside me, helping me to my feet. My leg wound was gone, though I could still feel the phantom pain where the creature's claws had raked across muscle and bone. Our camping gear was scattered around the clearing, but it was our original equipment. No tears, no blood, no signs of the nightmare we'd endured. "Where are the others?" I asked. Sarah's face was grim. "Look around, David. Really look." I did, and my heart sank. There were only 2 backpacks, 2 tents, 2 of everything, as if Michael, Jennifer, and Robert had never existed. "The reset," Sarah said quietly. "It didn't just return us to the beginning. It erased them from the timeline entirely." But even as she spoke, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Carved into the bark of a tree at the edge of the clearing were symbols, the same symbols we'd seen in the dirt around our corrupted campfire. And scratched beneath them, in Robert's careful handwriting, was a message. "I'll be waiting." We left that place immediately, hiking out on a trail that seemed somehow too eager to lead us away from the clearing. Neither of us spoke much during the 3-hour trek back to civilization. What was there to say? That we'd lost 3 people to something that might have been supernatural? That time itself had been twisted to erase any evidence of their existence? The authorities would never believe us. Hell, I'm not sure I believe it myself, except for the dreams. Every night since our return, I dream about that clearing. And in those dreams, Robert is always there, waiting patiently at the edge of the firelight. His eyes are still black, still hungry, and he's no longer alone. Each night there are more of them, shapes that might once have been human, gathered in the darkness beyond our camp, waiting for the next group of hikers to stumble into their temporal trap, waiting to feed, to grow, to become enough to finally escape that cursed place. I've tried to research the area, to find other reports of missing hikers or strange phenomena near Seneca Rocks, but the records are frustratingly incomplete. Official reports mention equipment failures and navigation errors, but no details about the nature of those failures. And when I drove back to the outfitter in Petersburg, the clerk who'd warned us about the hungry season was gone. The new owner claimed no one by his description had ever worked there. Sarah and I don't talk anymore. The shared experience bonded us, but it also poisoned any possibility of normal interaction. How do you make small talk with someone who watched you die and come back to life? How do you maintain professional relationships when you've seen the thin barrier between reality and nightmare? But I know she has the dreams too. I can see it in her eyes during our mandatory meetings. That haunted look of someone who's glimpsed something that shouldn't exist and lived to remember it. We're both marked now, connected to that place in ways I don't fully understand. The worst part is the certainty that it's not over. The symbols carved into that tree weren't just a message, they were an invitation. And sometimes, late at night when the darkness presses against my windows, I can hear Robert calling my name. His voice carries on wind that doesn't exist, promising that our reunion is inevitable. I know I should stay away from wilderness areas, should stick to cities and suburbs and places where artificial light keeps the deeper darkness at bay. But there's a part of me, a part that grows stronger each night, that wants to go back. That needs to go back. The hungry season is coming again, and the forest is calling. And God help me, I think I'm finally ready to answer. After all, Robert is waiting, and he's been alone for so long. My name is Kenneth Young, and I am 34 years old. This happened in the remote wilderness of Canaan Valley, deep in the Monongahela National Forest of West Virginia, where the ancient mountains hold secrets that should never be disturbed. The divorce papers had been finalized for 3 weeks when I decided I needed to get away from everything. The empty house, the pitying looks from co-workers, the constant reminders of a life that had crumbled around me. Sarah had taken everything that mattered except Scout, my 3-year-old German Shepherd. She'd said she couldn't handle a dog in her new apartment, as if Scout was just another piece of furniture to be discarded. "Just you and me now, boy," I whispered to Scout as we shouldered our packs at the Dolly Sods Wilderness Trailhead. The October morning was crisp, with fog rolling through the valleys like ghostly fingers. I'd chosen this remote section of the Appalachians specifically because it promised isolation. No cell towers, no crowds, just miles of untouched wilderness where I could think. Scout's ears perked up at every sound as we began our trek toward Breathed Mountain. The trail was barely visible, more of a deer path than anything maintained by the Park Service. According to my map, there was an old hunting cabin about 8 miles in, abandoned for decades but still standing. That would be our destination for the next 4 days. The first few hours passed peacefully. The autumn leaves created a canopy of gold and crimson above us, and Scout trotted alongside me with his tongue lolling out, occasionally darting off to investigate interesting scents. The steady rhythm of hiking helped quiet the chaos in my mind. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. It was around noon when I first noticed something odd. We'd been climbing steadily, and according to my GPS, we should have reached Roaring Creek by now, but the device showed our location as a blank void, as if we'd somehow stepped off the edge of the mapped world. "Piece of junk," I muttered, giving it a shake. The screen flickered, showing our position for a moment before going blank again. Scout whined softly, his ears flattening against his head. I pulled out the paper topographical map I'd brought as backup, spreading it against a fallen log. The terrain didn't match what I was seeing. According to the map, we should be following the creek, but I could hear no water nearby, only the whisper of wind through the trees and an odd rustling that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Scout suddenly went rigid, his hackles rising as he stared into the dense forest to our left. A low growl rumbled in his throat, something I'd rarely heard from him. He was typically friendly with everyone and everything. "What is it, boy?" I followed his gaze but saw nothing except the endless sea of trees. The rustling sound grew louder, like something large moving through the underbrush, but it stopped the moment I focused on it. We continued hiking, but the easy companionship of the morning had vanished. Scout kept looking over his shoulder, whimpering occasionally. The forest felt different now, too quiet, as if every bird and small animal had suddenly fled. Even the wind seemed muffled, creating an oppressive silence that made my own breathing sound unnaturally loud. By late afternoon, we still hadn't found Roaring Creek or any familiar landmarks. The trail had disappeared entirely, and I was navigating by compass alone. The October sun was getting low, casting long shadows that seemed to twist and writhe between the trees. That's when I heard the voice. "Help me." It was faint, distant, but unmistakably human. A woman's voice, filled with terror. Scout's ears swiveled toward the sound, but instead of alerting like he normally would, he pressed closer to my leg, trembling. The voice came again, closer this time. "Please, someone help me." Every instinct told me to investigate, to help whoever was in distress. But Scout's behavior gave me pause. Dogs sensed things humans couldn't. Still, I couldn't ignore someone who might be hurt. "Hello," I called out. "Where are you? Keep calling." For a moment there was silence. Then the voice came again and my blood ran cold. It was still the same woman's voice, but now it was coming from directly behind me. "Help me," it said in exactly the same tone, with exactly the same inflection as before. I spun around, heart hammering. Nothing. Just trees and shadows and the growing darkness between them. Scout was cowering now, pressing himself against my legs so hard he was nearly knocking me over. His entire body was shaking. "Come on, boy," I whispered, more to comfort myself than him. "Let's find somewhere to make camp." We pressed on as the light faded, and I grew increasingly desperate to find shelter. The temperature was dropping fast, and my breath was beginning to mist. Finally, just as full darkness threatened to overtake us, I spotted a structure through the trees. It wasn't the hunting cabin I'd been looking for. This was smaller, older, a one-room shack with a rusted tin roof and walls that had once been painted white but were now gray with age and weather. One window glowed faintly with the last of the daylight and the door hung slightly ajar. "Better than nothing," I said, though Scout clearly disagreed. He planted his feet and refused to move toward the structure, whining and pulling back on his leash. I approached cautiously, calling out in case someone was inside. No answer. The door creaked as I pushed it open, revealing a surprisingly clean interior. A small wood stove sat in one corner, with a neat stack of dry firewood beside it. A cot with clean blankets occupied another corner, and shelves lined the walls, stocked with canned goods and supplies. "Someone's been maintaining this place," I murmured, but Scout would not cross the threshold. He sat outside, whimpering and staring into the forest as if watching for something. I set up my tent outside instead, not wanting to use someone else's shelter without permission. But I did borrow some of the firewood, building a good blaze as darkness settled over the mountains. The fire's warmth was welcome, but it seemed to create more shadows than it banished, and the light didn't penetrate far into the surrounding forest. Scout refused to eat his dinner, instead lying with his head between his paws, eyes fixed on the darkness beyond our small circle of firelight. Every few minutes his ears would perk up and he'd growl softly at something I couldn't see or hear. I was heating a can of chili when I heard the footsteps. They were heavy, deliberate, circling our camp just beyond the reach of the firelight. The sound would approach from one direction, then stop abruptly and resume from another angle, as if whoever was out there was studying us. "Hello?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm just camping here for the night. I don't want any trouble." The footsteps stopped. Then, from the darkness, came my own voice. "Hello? I'm just camping here for the night. I don't want any trouble." It was perfect mimicry, not just the words, but my exact tone, my inflection, even the slight nervous tremor I'd tried to hide. Scout leaped to his feet, barking frantically at the darkness. My hands shook as I reached for the can of bear spray clipped to my belt. This wasn't human. No person could replicate a voice that perfectly, that quickly. "Hello? I'm just camping here for the night. I don't want any trouble." My voice came from a different direction now, then another. Soon, it was coming from all around us, my own words echoing back from the forest in a twisted chorus. The fire suddenly flared, shooting sparks high into the air, then died down to almost nothing despite the dry wood I'd fed it. In that moment of near darkness, I saw something that made my blood freeze. Eyes, dozens of them, reflecting the dim firelight from between the trees. They were too high off the ground to belong to any normal forest animal, and they moved independently of each other, as if attached to bodies that defied description. I threw more wood on the fire and the flames leaped back to life. The eyes vanished, but I could still hear movement in the darkness. Not footsteps now, but a sliding, rustling sound, like something dragging itself through the fallen leaves. Scout had stopped barking and was now pressed against my legs again, shaking so violently I could hear his teeth chattering. I kept the fire burning high all night, feeding it constantly, while the sounds continued around us. Sometimes they were far away, sometimes close enough that I could hear breathing in the darkness beyond the firelight. Dawn came like a blessing, gray and cold but wonderfully real. The sounds had stopped an hour before sunrise, and the forest looked normal again, just trees and rocks and morning mist. But Scout remained on edge, and when I examined our campsite in the daylight, I found tracks in the soft earth around the fire. They looked almost human, but wrong. Too long, with claw marks at the tips and spaced too far apart, as if made by someone with impossibly long legs. They circled our camp dozens of times, sometimes overlapping in patterns that hurt my eyes to follow. I broke camp quickly, eager to put distance between us and whatever had stalked us through the night. But as we hiked deeper into the mountains, I began to realize we were lost. The compass spun wildly, pointing in different directions every time I checked it. The GPS remained dead. Even the sun seemed wrong, staying low in the sky long past when it should have been overhead. "We're going in circles," I told Scout as we stopped for a water break. We'd been hiking for hours, but I swore I recognized this cluster of rocks from earlier in the day. Scout whined and pawed at my leg, looking back the way we'd come. That's when I heard the singing. It was a woman's voice, sweet and melodious, drifting through the trees like music from a dream. The tune was hauntingly beautiful, wordless but somehow familiar, like a lullaby half remembered from childhood. Scout's reaction was immediate and violent. He lunged away from the sound, nearly jerking the leash from my hands. But something about the singing called to me, promising comfort, promising answers. I found myself walking toward it almost without conscious thought. The voice led me off what remained of the trail, through a stand of ancient hemlocks whose branches blocked out most of the sky. The singing grew closer, more beautiful, and I could make out a figure ahead, a woman in a white dress, sitting on a fallen log with her back to me. "Excuse me," I called out, but she didn't turn around. She just continued singing, her voice now so lovely it brought tears to my eyes. Scout was barking behind me, straining against his leash, but the sound seemed muffled and distant. All I could focus on was the woman and her incredible voice. I was close enough now to see her long, dark hair spilling down her back in waves. "Miss, are you all right?" She turned then, and I screamed. Her face was gone, not removed or damaged, simply absent. Where features should have been was smooth pale skin stretched tight over skull, with dark holes where eyes and mouth should be. But the singing continued, impossibly beautiful, emanating from that hollow space where a mouth should have been. I stumbled backward, yanking Scout's leash, but when I looked again, she was gone. No sign she'd ever been there except for a depression in the leaves where something had sat. We ran then, crashing through the underbrush without regard for direction. Scout seemed to know where to go, pulling me along trails I couldn't see. Branches whipped at my face and thorns tore at my clothes, but I didn't stop until we burst out of the forest into a small clearing. In the center of the clearing stood the hunting cabin I'd been looking for from the beginning. It was smaller than I'd expected, built from logs that had weathered to silver gray. The roof sagged in places, and one window was boarded up, but it looked solid enough. Most importantly, it had 4 walls and a door that could be barred from the inside. Scout calmed somewhat once we were inside, though he remained alert, watching the windows. The cabin was musty but dry, with a stone fireplace and a few pieces of rough furniture. Someone had left a supply of canned goods and a Coleman lantern, suggesting that other hikers used this place regularly. I barricaded the door with a heavy wooden table and checked the windows to make sure they were secure. Only then did I allow myself to examine what had happened. The evidence was impossible to ignore. My watch had stopped sometime during the night, frozen at 3:17. The GPS was completely dead, not just malfunctioning, and when I checked my food supplies, I found that half my trail mix had spoiled overnight, covered with a black mold that stank of decay. "We're not dealing with anything natural here, boy," I whispered to Scout, who had finally started eating again. He looked up at me with those intelligent brown eyes, and I swear I saw understanding there. As darkness fell again, I lit the lantern and tried to make sense of our situation. According to my maps, the cabin should have been marked, but it appeared on none of them. The trails I'd followed didn't exist on paper. It was as if this entire area existed outside the normal world. That's when I remembered the stories my grandfather used to tell when I was a child. He'd grown up in these mountains, back when they were even more remote and wild. He spoke of things that lived in the deep woods, things that were neither animal nor human, but something hungry and ancient that had been here long before the first settlers arrived. "Wendigo," he'd whisper, making sure my grandmother couldn't hear. "They were people once, but they ate human flesh and it changed them. Made them into something else, something that's always hungry, always hunting. They can look like anyone, sound like anyone, but they're not human anymore. Not where it counts." I dismissed those stories as folklore, the superstitions of an uneducated mountain man. But now, sitting in that cabin with my dog pressed against my legs and something inhuman prowling the darkness outside, they seemed terrifyingly plausible. The sounds started again around midnight. Footsteps circling the cabin, occasionally punctuated by scratching at the walls. But this time there were voices too. My voice, calling Scout's name. Sarah's voice, pleading with me to let her in. My grandfather's voice, telling stories I'd heard as a child. "Kenneth," came my mother's voice from just outside the window. "Kenneth, honey, open the door. I'm lost." My mother had been dead for 5 years. Scout was going crazy, barking and snarling at the windows. The scratching grew louder as if whatever was outside was trying to claw through the logs. I could hear wood splintering somewhere, and a sound like breathing, magnified until it filled the entire cabin. Then everything went silent. The sudden absence of sound was somehow worse than the noise had been. I waited, hardly daring to breathe, straining to hear any indication of what was happening outside. A gentle knock came at the door. "Kenneth?" It was my own voice again, but quieter this time, more reasonable. "Kenneth, it's safe now. You can come out." The knocking continued, patient and persistent. "I know you're scared, but there's nothing to be afraid of anymore. I took care of the thing that was bothering you. It's gone now." Scout's hackles were up, but he wasn't barking anymore. He was staring at the door with an expression I'd never seen before. Not fear, but something like grief. "Come on. Kenneth, I'm getting cold out here. Just open the door." The voice was perfect. If I hadn't been inside the cabin, I would have sworn someone was talking to themselves outside. But I was inside, which meant something else was wearing my voice like a mask. "Kenneth, I know you can hear me." The tone was becoming impatient now. "Stop playing games and open this door." I pressed my back against the far wall, as far from the door as I could get. The lantern cast dancing shadows on the walls, and I found myself wondering if the light might be attracting whatever was outside. The knocking stopped. For several minutes there was nothing but silence. Then I heard a new sound. Footsteps moving around the cabin, slow and deliberate. They paused at each window, and I could feel something looking in, studying the barriers I'd created. "I can smell you in there," came a voice I didn't recognize, harsh and guttural, like gravel being ground together. "I can smell your fear, your dog's fear. Sweet, isn't it?" Scout whimpered and crawled under the cabin's one table, making himself as small as possible. "You can't stay in there forever," the voice continued. "I have all the time in the world. I've been waiting in these mountains for so long, and visitors are so rare, so special." I heard splintering wood and realized it was trying to tear through the wall. The scratching resumed, punctuated by impacts that shook the entire cabin. Dust rained down from the ceiling beams. "I've been so hungry," it said in my mother's voice now. "So very hungry. And you smell so good, Kenneth. You and your little dog." The scratching stopped suddenly. Then came a sound I'll never forget. A wet, sliding noise, like something massive moving across the roof. The ceiling creaked under its weight, and I could track its movement by the groaning of the wooden beams. Something began coming down the chimney. I could hear it scraping against the stone walls, moving with boneless fluidity. The fireplace was cold and dark, filled only with old ashes, but I could see the opening growing darker as something blocked the moonlight from above. Scout was whining continuously now, a high-pitched sound of pure terror. I grabbed the poker from beside the fireplace and held it like a weapon, though I doubted it would do much good against whatever was squeezing itself down that narrow chimney. A foot emerged from the fireplace, then a leg. But they were wrong. Too long, joints bending in directions that human joints shouldn't bend. The skin was pale as moonlight and stretched too tight over bones that jutted at odd angles. I backed toward the door, thinking I might be able to run while it was still partially trapped in the chimney. But as I reached for the barricade, more scratching came from outside. Something else was waiting out there. The thing in the fireplace was making progress, more of its impossible body sliding into the cabin. I caught a glimpse of its face as it turned toward me, features that shifted and flowed like melting wax, briefly resembling my own face, then Sarah's, then my grandfather's, never settling on one identity. Its eyes, though, remained constant, black holes that seemed to pull at something deep inside me, promising relief from pain, from loneliness, from the burden of being human. "Come here," it whispered in Sarah's voice. "Come to me, Kenneth. I've missed you so much." I almost did. Despite everything I'd seen, part of me wanted to believe it was really her, that somehow she'd come to find me in this nightmare place. But Scout's terrified whimpering broke the spell, reminding me what was real. I swung the poker with all my strength, catching the thing across what might have been its shoulder. It shrieked, a sound like tearing metal, and recoiled back toward the chimney. Black blood that stank of decay splattered across the cabin floor. The scratching outside intensified, and I heard wood beginning to give way. Whatever was out there would be inside soon. I had one chance. The cabin's back window was smaller than the others, barely large enough for a person to fit through. I'd left it unbarricaded because it seemed too small for anything to use as an entry point. "Come on, Scout," I hissed, grabbing my pack and the lantern. The German Shepherd understood immediately, leaping onto the table I'd set under the window. I boosted him through first, then squeezed after him just as something burst through the front door behind me. We tumbled into the darkness beyond, landing hard in a pile of rotting leaves. The lantern flickered but stayed lit, casting wild shadows as I scrambled to my feet, Behind us, the cabin was full of sounds, breaking furniture, inhuman voices calling my name, and that awful scratching. Scout pressed against my legs, and we stumbled away into the forest. I had no idea where we were going. The lantern provided only a small circle of light, and beyond it was absolute darkness. But Scout seemed to have a destination in mind, pulling me along what felt like a path. We walked for what felt like hours, the sounds from the cabin gradually fading behind us. My legs were shaking with exhaustion and terror, but I didn't dare stop. Whatever those things were, I had the feeling they would follow our scent. Dawn found us on a ridge overlooking a valley I didn't recognize. In the distance, I could see a road, a real, paved road with a yellow line down the middle. It was the most beautiful sight I'd ever seen. The hike down to the road took another hour, during which Scout gradually relaxed. By the time we reached the pavement, he was almost back to his normal self, though he kept looking back toward the mountains we'd left behind. A park ranger found us there, sitting beside the road in the morning sun. I was probably quite a sight, torn clothes, scratched face, wild eyes, but he took one look at Scout and seemed to understand that something serious had happened. "You folks get lost up there?" he asked kindly. I started to tell him the truth, then stopped. How could I explain something I barely understood myself? Instead, I nodded and said, "Got turned around. Spent a couple nights out there." He gave us a ride back to the trailhead where my car was parked. During the drive, he mentioned that several hikers had gone missing in that area over the years, people who simply vanished without a trace, despite extensive search efforts. "Strange country up there," he said. "Some of the old-timers say it's cursed. Of course, that's just superstition." I didn't argue with him. It's been 6 months since our encounter in the Monongahela forest. I've tried to put it behind me, to convince myself it was all some kind of stress-induced hallucination brought on by the divorce and isolation. But Scout knows better. He still has nightmares, whimpering and trembling in his sleep. And sometimes, late at night, I catch him staring out the window at nothing, his hackles raised and a low growl rumbling in his throat. I've researched the area extensively, trying to find some rational explanation for what we experienced. The official records are sparse, but I've found references in old newspapers and local histories. Stories of people who went into those mountains and came back changed, if they came back at all. Tales of voices in the woods, of figures that weren't quite human, of an ancient hunger that could never be satisfied. The Native Americans who originally lived in that region had a name for it, the place where things go wrong. They considered it forbidden territory, somewhere that good people didn't venture after dark. I think they were wise. Last week, I received a phone call that chilled my blood. It was my own voice on the other end, speaking words I'd never said. "Kenneth," it said, "I've been thinking about you, about our time together in the mountains. I'm still here, you know, still waiting, still hungry." The line went dead before I could respond. I've changed my phone number twice since then, but the calls keep coming. Always my own voice, always reminding me that something in those ancient mountains knows my name, knows my scent, and hasn't forgotten the taste of my fear. Scout and I don't go hiking anymore. We stay close to home, close to civilization, close to the comforting lights and sounds of the human world. But sometimes, when the wind is just right, I swear I can hear singing in the distance, a woman's voice, sweet and melodious, promising comfort to anyone brave enough to follow it into the darkness. I won't make that mistake again. Some hungers should never be fed, and some places should be left undisturbed. The mountains keep their secrets for good reason. But I can't shake the feeling that this isn't over, that something patient and terrible is still waiting in those shadowed valleys, wearing the faces of the lost and calling to the lonely with voices they recognize. And sometimes, in the darkest hours before dawn, I find myself wanting to answer. My name is Michael Williams, and I am 29 years old. This happened in the remote wilderness of the Monongahela National Forest, deep in the heart of West Virginia's Appalachian Mountains, near a place the locals called Blackwater Ridge. David Jones and I had been planning this trip for months. We'd both been grinding away at our desk jobs in Richmond, him as an accountant, me pushing papers at an insurance company, and we needed to get away from the fluorescent lights and endless meetings. David found the trail online, some obscure hiking forum post about untouched wilderness and pristine backcountry camping. The Blackwater Ridge Trail wasn't on any official maps, just GPS coordinates and a rough description. Follow Otter Creek Road past the last bridge, park at the old logging station, hike northwest for 3 miles until you reach the ridge. "Come on, Mike," David had said, spreading printouts across my kitchen table. "When's the last time we did something real? Something that mattered?" I stared at the grainy photos he'd downloaded. Thick forest, misty valleys, rocky outcroppings that looked like ancient fortresses. David was always the adventurous one. The guy who talked me into cliff jumping in college, who convinced me to try that sketchy sushi place downtown. His enthusiasm was infectious, but there was something else in his eyes that night. Something desperate. "Sarah thinks I'm having a midlife crisis," he'd admitted, running his fingers through his thinning brown hair. "Maybe she's right. Maybe I need to prove I'm still alive." So there we were, 3 weeks later, bouncing down a potholed dirt road in my Honda Civic, camping gear crammed into every available space. The October air was crisp and sharp, carrying the earthy smell of decomposing leaves. Massive oaks and maples towered over us, their branches forming a cathedral ceiling painted in brilliant oranges and deep reds. "GPS says we should be close," David said, squinting at his phone. "Signal's getting weak, though." I pulled over at what looked like it might have once been a logging station. Concrete foundations overgrown with kudzu, rusted equipment half buried in decades of fallen leaves. A weathered sign hung askew from a single bolt. "Danger, no trespassing, unstable mine shafts." "This is it," David announced, shouldering his pack with renewed energy. "Adventure awaits." The trail started as a barely visible depression in the forest floor, marked occasionally by faded orange blazes on tree trunks. Within an hour, even those disappeared. We followed what might have been an old deer path, using David's compass and the vague directions from the forum post. The forest grew denser as we climbed. Ancient hemlocks blocked out most of the afternoon sun, leaving us in a green-tinted twilight that made it impossible to judge the time. Our footsteps were muffled by a thick carpet of pine needles and moss, creating an unnatural quiet that made me want to whisper. "You hear that?" David stopped suddenly, hand raised. I listened. Nothing. Not even bird songs. "Hear what?" "Exactly. Where are all the animals?" Now that he mentioned it, the silence was unsettling. No squirrels chattering, no insects buzzing, no distant call of crows. Just our breathing and the soft squelch of our boots on the damp ground. "Maybe we're just too loud," I suggested, but even my voice sounded strangely flat in the stillness. We kept climbing. The trail, if it could still be called that, wound between massive boulders and over fallen logs that looked like they'd been there since before Columbus. My calves burned and sweat dripped into my eyes despite the cool air. David, usually the more talkative one, had grown quiet, checking his compass obsessively. "How much further?" I asked during a water break. "Should be close. Forum post said 3 miles. We've been hiking for 2 hours. I checked my watch. The digital display flickered strangely, showing 3:47 p.m., then 3:32 p.m., then 3:47 again. "My watch is acting up." David looked at his phone. "Mine's dead. Had full battery when we started." A chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air ran down my spine. How is that possible? Old battery, maybe? Look, there's the ridge. Through a gap in the trees ahead, I could see exposed rock face and what looked like a small clearing. We pushed through the last stretch of undergrowth and emerged onto a flat area about the size of a basketball court, surrounded by towering pines. The ground was surprisingly clear of vegetation, just bare dirt and scattered stones arranged in what almost looked like patterns. "This is perfect," David said, dropping his pack. "Flat ground, protected from wind, and look at that view." The clearing offered a spectacular vista of the valley below, endless forested ridges fading into blue-gray distance. But something about the place felt wrong. The stones weren't randomly scattered. They formed rough circles, and in the center of the clearing was a bare patch of earth about 6 feet across where nothing grew. "David, look at this." I knelt beside one of the stone circles. "These aren't natural." He was already setting up his tent, humming tunelessly. "Probably an old Indian camping spot. Makes sense. Best view for miles." I wanted to argue, to point out that the arrangement felt more recent, more deliberate, but David was in his element now. This was what he'd come for, the chance to be competent, self-reliant, alive. I kept my concerns to myself and started setting up my own shelter. By the time we had camp established, the sun was hanging low above the ridge, painting everything in harsh orange light that made the shadows seem deeper and more menacing. I tried to start a fire in the center stone circle, but the kindling wouldn't catch despite being dry. The matches flared and died immediately, as if the air itself was hostile to flame. "Here, let me try," David said, kneeling beside me. He struck a match and it caught immediately, the flame dancing bright and steady. But as soon as he touched it to the tinder, it went out with an audible hiss. "That's weird," he muttered, trying again. Same result. On the 5th attempt, the fire finally caught, but the flames burned an unnatural blue-green color that cast sickly shadows across our faces. David laughed it off as mineral deposits in the wood, but I noticed how the firelight seemed to stop at the edge of our clearing, as if the darkness beyond was too thick to penetrate. We ate dinner in relative silence, freeze-dried stroganoff that tasted like cardboard despite my hunger. The temperature was dropping fast, and our breath began to fog in the firelight. Beyond the clearing, the forest had become completely silent. No owl calls, no rustling of nocturnal creatures, no whisper of wind through branches. "I'm going to get more firewood," David announced, standing and stretching. "This stuff burns too fast." "I'll come with you," I said quickly. The thought of being alone in that clearing made my skin crawl. "Nah, you keep the fire going. I'll just grab some deadfall from right over there." He pointed to the tree line about 30 yards away. "Be back in 5 minutes." Before I could protest, he grabbed his flashlight and disappeared into the darkness between the trees. I watched his light bob and weave through the forest, gradually growing dimmer. Then it stopped moving. I counted to 60, then called out, "David, you okay?" No response. His light remained stationary, a faint glow maybe 50 yards into the woods. "David!" Louder this time. Still nothing. I stood up, considering following him, but something kept me rooted beside the fire. Some primal instinct that whispered warnings about leaving the light. Minutes passed. The fire crackled and popped, sending sparks spiraling up toward the star-filled sky. I fed it more wood, trying to keep the flames high. My watch was still malfunctioning, but it felt like David had been gone at least 20 minutes. Then I heard his voice, calling from the darkness. "Mike, come here, you have to see this." Relief flooded through me. "What is it?" "Just come here, bring your flashlight." I grabbed my light and started toward the sound of his voice, but something made me pause at the edge of the clearing. The voice had come from the wrong direction, northwest instead of due north where I'd seen his light disappear. "David, where are you exactly?" "Right here. Come on." Definitely northwest now, maybe 100 yards away, but his flashlight was still visible to the north, motionless among the trees. "David, I can see your light. Are you north or northwest of camp?" Silence. Then, after a long pause, "Mike, what are you talking about? I'm right here. Northwest. Come here." My hands were shaking as I raised my flashlight and aimed it toward the northern light. Through the trees, I could just make out a figure standing perfectly still, back turned toward me. The figure was holding a flashlight, but its posture was wrong. Too rigid, arms hanging at unnatural angles. "David!" I shouted at the top of my lungs. The figure in the woods slowly turned around. In the weak glow of my flashlight, I could see David's face, but something was horribly wrong with it. His mouth hung open too wide, and his eyes reflected the light like an animal's. "Mike," came the voice from the northwest again. "Perfectly normal. Perfectly David. What's wrong? Why are you shouting?" I stumbled backward, nearly falling into the fire. The figure to the north, the thing with David's face, raised one arm in a slow, jerky wave. Then it began walking toward me with a shambling, unnatural gait. "I'm coming back now," said the voice from the northwest. "Stay by the fire." I spun toward the sound just as David emerged from the tree line, arms full of firewood, looking perfectly normal. He saw my expression and dropped the wood. "Jesus, Mike, you look like you've seen a ghost. What happened?" I pointed toward the northern trees with a trembling hand. Nothing there, no light, no figure, just darkness. You were... I couldn't form the words. David set a hand on my shoulder. "Hey, it's okay. I know these mountains can play tricks on you. The isolation, the altitude, the way sound carries, it messes with your head." But as he spoke, I noticed something that made my blood freeze. David's boots were clean. Completely clean. No mud, no leaves, no sign that he'd been walking through the forest for the past half hour, and his jacket didn't have a single twig or piece of bark clinging to it. "Where did you go?" I asked quietly. "Just into the trees, like I said. Found some good deadfall about 50 yards out." He gestured vaguely toward the forest. "Sorry I was gone so long. Got turned around for a minute." He began feeding wood into the fire, humming the same tuneless melody he'd been humming earlier. But now it sounded different. Discordant, like a song played backward. I watched him carefully as he worked. Everything seemed normal, but small details felt wrong. The way he moved was just slightly off, like he was consciously thinking about each motion. He blinked too infrequently, and when he smiled at me, it lasted a few seconds too long. "I think we should leave," I said. "What? Why? We just got here." David's voice was perfectly reasonable, but there was something flat about it, like he was reading from a script. "Something's not right about this place. My watch is going crazy. Both our phones died, that weird fire earlier, and now..." "Now what?" David sat down across from me, the fire between us. In the flickering light, his face seemed to shift and change, features rearranging themselves in subtle ways. "Nothing. I'm just tired." "You should get some sleep then. I'll keep watch." The offer was logical, even kind, but something about the way he said it sent ice through my veins. The real David would have argued with me, would have demanded to know what had spooked me so badly. This David was too accommodating, too calm. "Yeah, maybe I will." I stood up slowly. "You sure you don't mind staying up?" "Not at all. I'm not tired yet." As I walked toward my tent, I felt his eyes following me. I unzipped the flap and crawled inside, but instead of getting into my sleeping bag, I lay still and listened. Outside, I could hear David moving around the fire, the scrape of wood on stone, the soft sounds of someone trying to be quiet. After what felt like an hour, those sounds stopped. I waited another 30 minutes, then carefully unzipped my tent just enough to peer out. David was sitting motionless beside the fire, staring directly at my tent. He hadn't moved a muscle in all the time I'd been watching. His eyes were open and unblinking, reflecting the firelight like mirrors. As I watched, his head tilted slightly to one side, then slowly tilted the other way, as if he were listening to something I couldn't hear. I eased the zipper closed and lay back down, heart hammering against my ribs. Whatever was sitting by that fire, it wasn't David. But where was he? And what had happened to him in those woods? I must have dozed off eventually because I woke to complete darkness and silence. The fire had died out, and I couldn't hear any movement outside. I checked my watch. The display was blank, not even the faint glow of the backlight. As quietly as possible, I felt around for my flashlight and turned it on. The beam cut through the tent fabric, revealing my small space. Everything seemed normal. I could hear my own breathing, rapid and shallow, but nothing else. I listened for several minutes before working up the courage to unzip the tent flap. My flashlight revealed the clearing, still and empty. The fire was nothing but cold ashes, and David's tent stood undisturbed on the far side. No sign of David himself. "David?" I whispered. No response. I crawled out of my tent and stood up, sweeping my light across the clearing. The stone circles were still there, but they seemed different somehow. Larger, more defined, as if something had been rearranging them during the night. David's tent was zipped shut. I approached it slowly, noting that no sound came from within. "David? You in there?" I reached for the zipper, then hesitated. What if David was in there? What if he was sleeping peacefully and I was just being paranoid? But what if something else was in there, wearing David's face, waiting for me? I grabbed the zipper and yanked it down in one quick motion, then shined my light inside. Empty. The sleeping bag was unzipped from the inside and thrown back, as if David had gotten up suddenly. His backpack was still there, but when I looked closer, I noticed all his food was gone. Not just eaten, gone. The packages were there, but they were all empty, as if something had consumed everything and carefully resealed each wrapper. A twig snapped behind me. I spun around, and my flashlight illuminated David standing at the edge of the clearing. He was completely naked, his skin pale and waxy in the harsh light. But it was his eyes that made me take a step backward. They were black, not just the pupils, but the entire eyes, like polished obsidian. "Where have you been?" he asked, and his voice echoed strangely, as if it were coming from somewhere far away. "I've been looking for you." "David?" My voice cracked. "Are you okay?" He took a step forward, and I noticed his movements were wrong. Too fluid, like he was floating rather than walking. "I found something in the woods. Something wonderful. Do you want to see?" "I think we should leave, right now." David's head tilted to one side and he smiled, but the smile was too wide, extending further than a human mouth should be able to stretch. "You can't leave. None of us can leave. We're part of it now." "Part of what?" "The hollow, the hunger, the dark between the trees." His voice was changing, becoming layered, as if multiple people were speaking through his mouth. "It's been waiting so long for visitors." I backed toward my tent, keeping the flashlight trained on him. "David, listen to me. You're sick. Something happened to you in the woods. But we can get help. We just need to get back to the car." "There is no car." David giggled, and the sound was like breaking glass. "There never was a car. You've been here with us for days. Don't you remember?" The memory hit me like a physical blow. David and I hiking up the trail, setting up camp, eating dinner. But now I remembered other details too. David going into the woods and not coming back. Me following him and finding something. A pit in the earth filled with white bones that gleamed in my flashlight beam. And David standing beside it. No longer David, inviting me to climb down and join the others. "No," I whispered. "That didn't happen. Look at your hands." I looked down. My hands were pale and thin, the skin translucent enough to show the dark veins beneath. My fingernails had grown long and sharp, and there was dirt under them. Old dirt, like I'd been clawing at something for a long time. "Look at your tent." I turned my flashlight toward my shelter. The fabric was rotted and full of holes, covered in mold and collapsed in several places. It looked like it had been there for months. "How long?" I asked. "Time doesn't work the same way here," David said, his voice now completely inhuman. "Sometimes it's minutes, sometimes it's years. But once you've seen the hollow, once you've fed the hunger, you can never really leave." I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. Looking down, I saw my feet were bare and gray, the toes elongated into claw-like appendages that dug into the earth. When had I lost my boots? "The others are waiting," David said, gesturing toward the tree line. I looked where he pointed and saw them, figures standing motionless among the trees. Dozens of them, all with the same waxy skin and black eyes. Men, women, children, all wearing the tattered remains of hiking clothes from different eras. Some of the clothing looked modern, but others seemed older. Flannel shirts and wool pants that might have been from the 1970s, even older garments that could have been from decades past. "We're the Hollow Men," David explained, his words now accompanied by the sound of wind through empty spaces. "We exist in the spaces between heartbeats, in the pause between breaths. We're the hunger that lives in dark places, and we've been waiting so long for new friends." One of the figures began walking toward us, a young woman in a bright red jacket that looked almost new. But as she approached, I could see the jacket was faded and torn, and her face was the color of old bone. "Rebecca," she said, extending a hand toward me. "Rebecca Turner. I got lost on the Appalachian Trail 3 months ago. Or was it 3 years? Time is funny here." Her hand was ice cold and felt like dried leather. Behind her, more figures were emerging from the woods, forming a circle around the clearing. They all looked like hikers, backpackers, people who had come seeking adventure in the wilderness and found something else entirely. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "Nothing," David said. "You're already one of us. You have been since you saw the hollow, since you looked into the hunger and let it look back. The only question now is whether you remember." And then I did remember, following David into the woods and finding the pit, but not just a pit. A wound in the earth that seemed to extend forever downward, lined with pale stones that weren't stones at all but bones. Millions of bones from things that had crawled down into the darkness seeking something they could never find. I remembered David falling in, his scream echoing up from impossible depths. I remembered reaching down to help him and feeling something grab my wrist with fingers that were too long and too cold. I remembered being pulled down into that horrible darkness, falling past walls lined with the remnants of everyone who had ever found this place. And I remembered climbing back out, but wrong, changed, hollow. "How many others have there been?" I asked. "Hundreds," David said. "Thousands. This place has been calling to travelers for as long as there have been trails through these mountains. We're all part of it now, all part of the collection." "Collection of what?" "Memories, experiences, lives half-lived." The woman in the red jacket, Rebecca, stepped closer. "The hollow feeds on potential, on all the things we might have done if we'd made it home. It keeps us here to savor our unrealized dreams." I looked around at the figures surrounding me, really seeing them for the first time. They weren't just hollow-eyed monsters. They were people. People with families who were probably still looking for them, filing missing person reports, checking every hospital and morgue, never knowing that their loved ones were standing in a circle on a mountain ridge, playing out the same conversations with every new arrival. "Is there any way out?" I asked. "There's always hope," said a man in a plaid shirt whose name might have been Kenneth or Keith. "Every new person who finds us brings the possibility that maybe this time will be different. Maybe this time someone will be strong enough to break the pattern." "But it never works?" "Not yet," David admitted. "But we keep trying. What else is there to do?" I thought about my life back in Richmond. My cramped apartment, my meaningless job, my ex-girlfriend who'd left because I was emotionally unavailable. Maybe being trapped here wasn't so different from being trapped there. At least here I had company, even if that company was composed of the undead remains of decades' worth of missing hikers. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we wait," Rebecca said, "and when the next group arrives, we try to warn them. We try to save them, and we fail because the hollow is stronger than any of us. But sometimes," added a teenager in a Metallica t-shirt who looked like he'd been lost since the 1990s, "sometimes we remember what it felt like to be alive. And that's something." As the sun began to rise, or seemed to begin to rise since time worked differently here, the figures faded back into the woods like morning mist. David and I were left alone in the clearing, which now looked exactly as it had when we'd first arrived. Fresh and clean, with no sign of the rotted tent or the bone circles. "Someone new will come," David said, settling down beside the cold fire pit. "Maybe today, maybe next week. The Hollow is patient." "And we'll try to warn them?" "We'll try. We always try. But the Hollow is clever. It makes us look like ordinary hikers. Makes our warnings sound like the ravings of people who've been in the woods too long. And by the time they realize the truth, it's too late." I sat down beside him and looked out over the valley. The view was still spectacular, the kind of vista that made you understand why people risk their lives to reach places like this. But now I could see other things too. Dark spots in the forest where the trees grew in unnatural patterns, shadow-filled hollows that seemed to pulse with their own malevolent life. "David?" "Yeah?" "Do you think our families are still looking for us?" He was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was almost human again. "My mom always said she'd never stop looking, even if it took forever." "Forever's a long time." "Yeah," he said, "but maybe that's how long we've got." In the distance, I could hear the sound of voices. Happy, excited voices getting closer. New hikers, probably following the same vague directions we'd found online, drawn by the promise of untouched wilderness and pristine backcountry camping. David and I exchanged a look. We both knew what came next. We'd stand up, dust ourselves off, and become ordinary backpackers again. We'd wave at the newcomers, maybe share some trail advice, offer to help them set up camp in this perfect clearing with its spectacular view. And when night fell, the Hollow would open again, hungry for fresh memories and unrealized dreams. But maybe this time would be different. Maybe this time we'd find the right words, the right warning that would make them turn around and flee back down the mountain. Maybe this time someone would be strong enough to break the pattern that had trapped us here with all the others. The voices were getting closer now, and I could make out individual words, something about GPS coordinates and a post on a hiking forum. I looked at David, and for just a moment, I saw my friend as he really was. Not the hollow-eyed thing that had emerged from the woods, but the man who'd worked beside me for 3 years, who'd talked me into trying new restaurants and taking weekend trips, who'd been searching for something real in a world that felt increasingly artificial. "Ready?" he asked. I nodded, and we stood up together. Whatever we'd become, whatever the Hollow had made us, we were still us, still friends, still trying to help people, even if that help came in the form of an impossible choice between escape and eternity. The first hiker appeared at the edge of our clearing, a young woman with bright hiking gear and an eager smile. Behind her came 2 more, a couple holding hands and looking around with the kind of wonder that I remembered feeling when David and I had first arrived. "Hey there," David called out, his voice warm and friendly. "Beautiful spot, isn't it?" And the cycle began again, as it had been beginning for longer than any of us could remember, as it would continue until someone finally found a way to break the hunger that lived in the hollow places of the world. But until then, we had each other. We had hope, and we had forever. Even if forever meant watching the same tragedy play out again and again, somewhere between the heartbeats, in the pause between breaths, in the dark spaces between the trees where lost things go to wait. My name is Michael Williams, and I am 29 years old. This happened in the remote wilderness of the Monongahela National Forest, and it's still happening, will always be happening, in the place the locals call Blackwater Ridge. If you ever see coordinates for a trail that doesn't appear on any official maps, if you ever read a forum post about untouched wilderness near an old logging station, if you ever feel called to seek something real in the deep places of the world, remember this story. Remember us, and choose a different path. My name is Michael Williams, and I am 28 years old. This happened in the remote hollows of Monongahela National Forest, West Virginia, near the abandoned mining town of Thurmond, 3 miles past Spruce Knob, where the old logging roads disappear into the mountain's belly. It was supposed to be a simple weekend trip. Just me, David Jones, and Christopher Hernandez. 3 guys from the accounting firm trying to escape the suffocating fluorescent lights and endless spreadsheets that had become our lives. Chris had found this spot on some obscure hiking forum, a place called Devil's Throat Hollow, where an old mining operation had carved deep wounds into the mountainside decades ago. The locals in Thurmond wouldn't talk about it, just shook their heads and changed the subject when Chris asked for directions. We should have listened to them. Friday evening, we parked Chris's beaten Ford at the end of Forest Road 112, where the pavement crumbled into gravel and then disappeared entirely. The forest pressed in around us immediately, ancient hemlocks and oaks that blocked out most of the dying sunlight, their branches interwoven like arthritic fingers. The air smelled wrong from the start. Not the clean pine scent you'd expect, but something metallic and sour, like copper pennies left in stagnant water. David, ever the optimist, shouldered his oversized pack with a grin. "Come on, boys. Adventure awaits." He was the kind of guy who still believed the world was fundamentally good, who helped old ladies cross streets and donated to every charity that called. His naivety had always annoyed me, but that weekend, I envied him. Chris was different, quieter. He'd been different since his divorce 6 months earlier, developing an obsession with remote places, as if he could literally run away from his problems. He stood at the trailhead longer than necessary, consulting his GPS with a frown. "Signal's already cutting out," he muttered, tapping the device. "Shows us about 2 miles from the campsite, but what?" I asked, adjusting my pack straps. The weight felt heavier than it should have. "The trail on here doesn't match what I printed from the forum." He held up a hand-drawn map, photocopied and blurry. "This shows the path turning east after the creek, but the GPS wants us to go north." A cold wind swept down from the mountains, carrying with it the smell of decay. Somewhere in the distance, I heard what sounded like metal grinding against stone, though I couldn't place the source. "Technology fails," David said, already starting down the narrow trail that disappeared into shadow. "That's why we brought the paper backup, right? Besides, what's the worst that could happen?" Famous last words. The trail wound deeper into the hollow, following a creek that ran black as motor oil in the failing light. The water moved wrong, too, sluggish in some places, rushing frantically in others, as if it couldn't decide which direction it wanted to flow. Every few hundred yards, we'd find remnants of the old mining operation, rusted rail tracks leading nowhere, concrete foundations crumbling under decades of root growth, and holes in the mountainside that exhaled cold air like the breathing of something massive and buried. By the time we reached what Chris insisted was our campsite, full darkness had settled over the hollow like a suffocating blanket. The spot was a small clearing beside the creek, surrounded by towering hemlocks that creaked and groaned in the wind. The sound was constant like a chorus of the dying. "This doesn't look right," I said, setting down my pack. "Where are the fire rings? The forum post mentioned established campsites." Chris consulted his map again, holding it close to his flashlight. "This has to be it. See? The creek makes that bend, and there's the rocky outcrop." I looked where he pointed. The rocky outcrop was there, all right, a jagged formation that jutted from the mountainside like broken teeth. But in the shifting shadows cast by our flashlights, it almost looked like something else, something that might have been watching us. We set up camp in silence, each lost in our own growing unease. David's usually constant chatter had dried up, and even he seemed to feel the oppressive weight of the place. The darkness here wasn't just the absence of light, it was a presence unto itself, pressing against our small bubble of illumination with almost physical force. When we finally got the fire going, it burned wrong. The flames danced higher than they should have, crackling and spitting in a rhythm that almost sounded like speech. Worse, the light barely penetrated the surrounding darkness. The trees remained invisible beyond a few feet, though I could feel them there, leaning in, listening. "Anyone else notice how quiet it is?" David asked, poking at the fire with a stick. No owls, no insects, nothing. He was right. The forest was silent except for the wind and the creek and that constant groaning of wood that seemed to come from all directions at once. It was the kind of silence that makes you want to scream just to prove you still exist. Old mining sites are like that, Chris said, though his voice lacked conviction. Chemical runoff, disrupted ecosystem. It'll probably get more normal as we get farther from the old workings. But I was beginning to suspect we weren't getting farther from anything. If anything, I felt like we were being drawn deeper into something we didn't understand. That first night, none of us slept well. Every time I dozed off, I'd wake to some sound. Footsteps circling our camp, branches breaking, or something that might have been whispered conversation just beyond the dying firelight. Once, around 3 a.m., I could have sworn I heard David's voice calling my name from the direction of the creek, even though he was snoring in his sleeping bag 3 feet away. Saturday morning brought no relief. We woke to find our fire reduced to cold ash, though I distinctly remembered banking it with enough coals to last until dawn. Worse, David's hiking boots were missing from where he'd left them outside his tent. They were right here, he insisted, standing barefoot in the dew-soaked grass. I always leave them in the same spot. We searched the immediate area but found nothing. It was Chris who discovered them 40 minutes later, hung from a branch 15 feet up in a hemlock on the far side of the creek. There was no way they could have gotten there naturally, and no way any of us could have reached that high to hang them there ourselves. Animals, Chris said, but his voice was hollow. Bears, maybe. They're curious about human scents. David retrieved his boots with the climbing rope, and we ate a subdued breakfast of instant oatmeal and coffee that tasted like dirt. The plan had been to day hike deeper into the hollow, following the old mining roads to the main excavation site that Chris's forum post had promised would be absolutely incredible. The mining roads were still there, carved into the mountainside like scars that refused to heal. But following them proved more difficult than expected. The GPS had given up entirely, showing only static, and our compass seemed to spin randomly, never settling on true north for more than a few seconds. "It's the iron deposits," Chris explained, though he sounded like he was trying to convince himself. "Mining areas always mess with magnetic readings." We followed what we thought was the main road for 3 hours, climbing steadily through forests that grew more unnatural with each step. The trees here were wrong, twisted into shapes that hurt to look at, their bark scarred with patterns that almost resembled faces. The creek followed us, sometimes on our left, sometimes on our right, sometimes seeming to flow uphill. It was David who first noticed we were being followed. "There's someone behind us," he whispered during a rest stop, his face pale despite the exertion. "I keep seeing movement in the trees." I turned to look back down the trail. For a moment, I saw nothing but the twisted forest. Then, just at the edge of my vision, I caught a glimpse of something that might have been a person. Tall and thin, moving wrong, like stop-motion animation missing half its frames. "Hello," Chris called out, his voice echoing strangely in the hollow. "Are you lost? Do you need help?" The figure, if it had been a figure, melted back into the shadows. But I could still feel eyes on us, tracking our every movement. We found the main excavation site around noon, and immediately wished we hadn't. The mining operation had carved a wound into the mountain that seemed to descend forever. The pit was roughly circular, maybe 200 feet across, with a road that spiraled down along its walls, disappearing into blackness. But it wasn't the size that made my stomach clench. It was the smell rising from the depths. Death and decay and something else. Something chemical and wrong that made my sinuses burn. "Jesus," David breathed, covering his nose with his shirt. "What did they mine here?" Chris consulted his photocopied information. "Coal, mostly, some iron ore. Says here the operation shut down in 1963 after a series of accidents." I walked closer to the edge, my boots sending small stones tumbling into the abyss. The sound of their impact never came back. "What kind of accidents?" I asked. Chris's face had gone gray as he read. "Cave-ins, equipment failures. But listen to this. 17 workers reported missing during the final week of operation. Search teams found no bodies. Mine declared unsafe and permanently sealed. Sealed? David looked around the gaping pit. This doesn't look sealed to me. That's what it says. All tunnels and access points dynamited and sealed with concrete. Chris folded the paper carefully. Maybe someone reopened it. Urban explorers or... He didn't finish the sentence, but I knew what he was thinking. The same thing I was thinking. We weren't alone out here. The smart thing would have been to leave right then, to pack up our camp and hike back to the truck and pretend we'd never found this place. But Chris had that look in his eyes, the same look he'd had since his divorce, the look of a man running from something and willing to run straight into something worse rather than turn around. "I want to go down," he said. "Are you insane?" David's voice cracked. "That thing could collapse, and the smell. Just to the first level. Look, there's the road. It's carved right into the rock, solid as anything." Chris was already pulling rope from his pack. I didn't come all this way to stare at a hole in the ground. I should have stopped him, should have knocked him down and tied him up if necessary. Instead, I watched him gear up and wondered why I wasn't more afraid than I was. Part of me, a part I didn't like to acknowledge, was curious about what lay in those depths. "If we're doing this, we stick together," I said. "And at the first sign of trouble, we get out." David stared at both of us like we'd lost our minds. "I'm not going down there." "Then stay here and keep watch," Chris said, securing the rope around a sturdy hemlock. "If we're not back in 2 hours, hike out and call for help. The phones don't work out here, remember? Then drive to town. Do whatever you have to do." David nodded reluctantly, and Chris and I began our descent into hell. The road spiraled down along the pit walls, cut wide enough for mining equipment but crumbling in places where decades of weather had worn away the edges. Our flashlights carved narrow cones of light through air that grew thicker and more toxic with each step downward. The walls were streaked with moisture that reflected our lights like oil, and periodically we'd pass the mouths of tunnels that exhaled cold air and the sound of dripping water. "Look at this," Chris whispered, stopping beside one of the tunnel entrances. I aimed my light where he pointed. Scratch marks covered the tunnel walls, deep gouges in the stone that could have been made by mining equipment, or by something with very large claws trying to get out. "Bears," I said automatically, though I didn't believe it. "Bears don't scratch stone." We continued downward. The pit seemed to descend much farther than it had looked from above. We'd been walking for 20 minutes and still couldn't see the bottom. Worse, the road was becoming less stable. In several places, we had to edge carefully around gaps where the surface had collapsed entirely. It was during one of these careful passages that we heard the screaming. It came from above us, echoing down the pit walls. David's voice, raw with terror, calling our names. Then it cut off abruptly, leaving only the sound of water dripping in the darkness. "David!" Chris shouted, his voice bouncing off the stone walls. "David, what's wrong?" No answer. We looked at each other, and I saw my own fear reflected in Chris's eyes. Without speaking, we both started climbing back up the road as fast as we dared. The loose stone made every step treacherous, and twice I nearly slipped over the edge into the abyss. It took us 40 minutes to reach the surface, our lungs burning from the exertion and the poisonous air. When we finally hauled ourselves over the rim of the pit, we found our rope still tied to the hemlock, but no sign of David. "David!" Chris called again, his flashlight sweeping the forest. "This isn't funny, man." I found the first clue 30 feet from the pit. David's backpack, torn open and scattered across the ground. His water bottle lay among fallen leaves, the cap missing and the contents evaporated. But it was what I found next that made my blood freeze. David's hiking boots, again, sitting side by side on a flat stone like an offering, laces tied in perfect bows. "He wouldn't take them off," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Not out here. Not with all the rocks and—" Chris was scanning the ground with his light, looking for tracks. "Here," he said, kneeling beside a patch of soft earth. "Footprints, bare feet, heading toward the creek." We followed the trail, calling David's name, but our voices seemed to be swallowed by the forest before they could travel more than a few yards. The footprints led to the creek bank, then disappeared in the rocky shallows. "He must have crossed," Chris said, though he sounded uncertain. "Maybe he's lost, confused. People do strange things when they panic." But I was looking at the footprints more carefully, and something was wrong with them. They were David's size, but the stride was too long, and the impression of the toes too deep, as if whatever made them had been walking on its tiptoes. We crossed the creek and searched until darkness fell, but found no trace of David beyond those strange footprints. Finally, exhausted and terrified, we made our way back to camp to figure out what to do next. That's when we found him. David was sitting by our cold fire pit, fully clothed except for his missing boots, staring into the ashes. He didn't look up when we approached, didn't acknowledge our frantic questions about where he'd been or why he'd screamed. "David." Chris knelt beside him. "Hey, buddy, are you okay? What happened?" David slowly turned his head toward us, and I took an instinctive step backward. His eyes were wrong, not the color, but the expression. They were too wide, unblinking, like a reptile's eyes, and when he smiled, it stretched too far across his face. "I went for a walk," he said in David's voice, but flatter somehow, emotionless. "I wanted to see the bottom of the hole." "The bottom?" Chris frowned. "But you stayed up here. You said you wouldn't go down." "I changed my mind." David's smile never wavered. "It's beautiful down there. So many tunnels, so many places to hide." Something ice cold crawled up my spine. "David, are you feeling all right? Did you hit your head?" "I feel wonderful." He blinked once, slowly, like a lizard. "Better than I've ever felt. The voices explained so much." Chris and I exchanged glances. "What voices?" Chris asked carefully. "The miners. They're still down there, you know, still working. They told me about the seam they found in '63. Not coal, something else. Something that had been waiting." David stood up with fluid grace, moving in a way that was almost but not quite human. "They want to meet you. Both of you. They have so much to show you." I was already backing toward my tent, my hands shaking as I fumbled for my pack. Whatever was wearing David's face, it wasn't David anymore. The real David would never speak in that monotone, would never stand so perfectly still, would never look at his friends with those cold, reptilian eyes. "I think we should go," I said, my voice higher than I intended. "Pack up, head back to the truck. David's not feeling well." "I'm feeling perfect," David said, taking a step toward me. "And we can't leave yet. They're waiting for us. They've been waiting so long." Chris was staring at David with growing alarm. "Dude, you're freaking us out. What's wrong with your eyes?" David tilted his head at an angle that was just wrong, like a bird studying an insect. "Nothing's wrong. I can see so much more now. I can see what you really are underneath." That's when I noticed David's feet. He was standing on the rocky ground without any sign of discomfort, but that wasn't what terrified me. It was the fact that he was standing perfectly balanced on his tiptoes, his heels never touching the ground, just like the footprints we'd followed. "Chris," I whispered, "we need to run, right now." But Chris was transfixed, staring at the thing that looked like David. "What did they do to you down there?" David laughed, and the sound was like grinding metal. "They showed me the truth. That flesh is just a costume. That this mountain is hollow, and we're the ones who are empty." He took another step forward, and I could see that his fingernails had grown longer, darker, more like claws. "They want to show you too. They want to fill the empty spaces inside you." I grabbed Chris's arm. "Move! Now!" We ran. Behind us, David began to scream. Not with terror or pain, but with laughter that echoed through the hollow like the sound of breaking glass. I didn't look back, but I could hear him following, his footsteps too light for someone of his size, moving through the forest with impossible speed. We crashed through the underbrush, our flashlights carving wild arcs through the darkness. Branches tore at our clothes and faces, but we didn't slow down. The trail we'd followed that morning was gone, or we were too panicked to find it, and soon we were completely lost in the twisted forest. "This way," Chris gasped, pointing toward what looked like a break in the trees. "I think I see the road." We stumbled toward the opening, but it wasn't a road. It was another pit, smaller than the main excavation but just as deep. And standing around its rim, barely visible in our failing flashlight beams, were figures that might once have been human. They were tall and thin, dressed in the rotted remains of work clothes from decades past. Their skin was gray as mine tailings, and their eyes reflected our lights like an animal's. They stood perfectly still, watching us with the same reptilian patience I'd seen in David's transformed face. "Welcome," one of them said in a voice like grinding stone. "We've been waiting for you." Chris whimpered and stumbled backward, but there was nowhere to go. The figures had us surrounded, and in the distance I could hear David's laughter growing closer. "What do you want?" I managed to ask. "Nothing," the figure replied. "Everything. The mountain is hungry, and we are its hands. You came to us willingly, walked into our domain. Now you'll help us gather others." "We'll leave," Chris said, his voice breaking. "We'll never come back. We won't tell anyone about this place." "Oh, but you will come back," another figure said, stepping closer. "You'll bring your friends, your family. You'll spread the word about this beautiful remote place, and when they arrive, we'll be waiting." The first figure smiled, revealing teeth like broken glass. "That's how it works. That's how it's always worked. The mountain calls and people answer. Some become us. Others become food." David emerged from the forest behind us, but he was different now. Taller, thinner, his limbs elongated like taffy. His clothes hung in tatters from his transformed frame, and his smile had split his face nearly in half. "I brought them," he said to the assembled figures, "just like you asked." "Good," the first figure replied. "Which one first?" I don't remember making the decision to fight. One moment I was standing frozen with terror, the next I was swinging my heavy flashlight at the nearest figure's head. It connected with a wet crunch, and the thing stumbled backward, black fluid pouring from its skull. "Run!" I screamed at Chris, and this time he didn't hesitate. We broke through their circle and plunged into the forest, the sounds of pursuit right behind us. Something that had once been David moved through the trees above us, leaping from branch to branch like a spider, occasionally dropping down to slash at us with claws that left deep gouges in the tree trunks. I don't know how long we ran. Hours, maybe. The forest became a nightmare maze of thorns and shadows, every path leading us deeper into the hollow rather than out. Our flashlights died one by one, leaving us stumbling blind through a darkness so complete it felt solid. It was Chris who found the cave. "Here," he gasped, pulling me toward a narrow opening in the mountainside. "We can hide." The cave was small but deep, extending back into the mountain farther than our dying light could penetrate. We crawled as far back as we could and huddled together, listening to the sounds of our pursuers searching the forest outside. For hours, we heard them calling to each other in voices that weren't quite human, organizing their hunt with the patience of predators who knew their prey had nowhere to go. Sometimes David's voice would join the chorus, though the words he spoke weren't in any language I recognized. "What are they?" Chris whispered. I'd been wondering the same thing. "I think they were miners once. Real people. But something changed them. Something they found down in that pit. And David?" I closed my eyes, remembering my friend's transformed face. "David's gone. That thing might have his memories, his voice, but it's not him anymore." Chris started to cry then, quiet sobs that he tried to muffle against his sleeve. I wanted to comfort him, but I didn't have any comfort to give. We were trapped in a mountain full of things that used to be human, and I was starting to doubt we'd ever see daylight again. That's when I noticed the draft. Air was moving through the cave from somewhere deeper inside, carrying with it the faint scent of pine and night sky. Fresh air, which meant there was another way out. "Chris," I whispered, "there's a passage, a way through the mountain." He looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. "Are you sure?" "Only one way to find out." We crawled deeper into the cave, following the air current through passages that grew narrower and narrower. Several times I thought we'd reached a dead end, only to find that the tunnel continued at a sharp angle or dropped down to a lower level. The rock around us was strange. Not the limestone I'd expected, but something darker and more crystalline that seemed to absorb our light. It was in one of the deeper chambers that we found the bodies. They were mummified by the dry air, preserved in positions that suggested they'd died in agony. Miners from the 1960s, their equipment still clutched in skeletal hands. But these weren't the transformed creatures we'd encountered outside. These were the ones who hadn't changed, who'd died as themselves. Chris picked up a moldering notebook from beside one of the bodies. "Listen to this," he whispered, reading by the light of our last working flashlight. "Day 12, underground. The seam keeps growing. It's not coal. It's something alive, something that whispers." Jenkins changed today, stood up from where he'd fallen and looked at us with eyes like holes. He's not Jenkins anymore. God help us, it's spreading. The entries continued, documenting the gradual transformation of the mining crew. The final entry was written in a shaking hand. "They're all changed now except for me and Martinez. We're going deeper, trying to find another way out. If anyone finds this, don't follow the seam. Don't let it touch you. It's not from this world." We left the bodies and continued following the air current. The passage sloped upward now, and I could feel a change in air pressure that suggested we were approaching the surface. But the walls here were covered with the same crystalline substance we'd seen before, and it seemed to pulse with its own internal light. The seam. This had to be what the miners had found. "Don't touch it," I warned Chris as we squeezed through a particularly narrow section. "Don't let any part of your body make contact." But the passage was so tight that avoiding the walls was impossible. I felt the crystal brush against my shoulder, and immediately a shock of cold ran through my body. For just a moment, I heard voices whispering in my head. Ancient voices speaking in tongues that predated human language. They were hungry voices, eager voices, promising transformation and truth and freedom from the burden of flesh. I stumbled forward, gasping, and the voices faded. But I could feel something different about myself now, something cold and patient stirring in the depths of my mind. "Michael?" Chris grabbed my arm. "Are you okay? You stopped moving." "I'm fine," I lied, though I could feel tendrils of wrongness spreading through my thoughts like ice crystals forming in water. "Keep moving." We climbed for what felt like hours, the air growing fresher with each step. Finally, impossibly, I saw a star through a crack in the rock above us. Real starlight, not the false illumination of the seam. The opening was barely wide enough for a human body, but we squeezed through and emerged onto a hillside miles from where we'd entered the cave. The truck was gone. David must have taken the keys when he transformed, but we were alive and free. Or so I thought. We hiked for 2 days before reaching the town of Thurmond, living on stream water and the energy bars in our pockets. The locals took one look at us and their faces went pale, but they gave us food and a ride to the nearest police station. The official report blamed our story on exposure and dehydration. David was listed as missing, presumed dead in a hiking accident. Search teams found no trace of him or the strange mining site we described. The GPS coordinates we gave them led to empty forest. But I know what I saw. I know what happened to David. And I know that the things in Devil's Throat Hollow are still there, still waiting for the next group of hikers to wander into their domain. And I know something else. Something I haven't told Chris or the police or anyone. The cold that touched me in that crystal-lined passage never went away. It's growing stronger each day, spreading through my thoughts like frost on a window. Sometimes, late at night, I hear the whispers again. Patient voices promising transformation, promising relief from the burden of human emotion and weakness. I've started researching remote hiking locations, places where people go to get away from civilization. I've joined online forums, sharing beautiful photos and detailed directions to places that don't exist, places that lead to Devil's Throat Hollow. I can't help myself. The cold whispers that it's necessary, that the mountain needs to feed, that I'm just doing what I was designed to do. Chris suspects something's wrong. He keeps asking why I won't go hiking with him anymore, why I've become so interested in planning trips for other people. Yesterday, he said my eyes looked different. He's right, of course. They are different. When I look in the mirror now, I see something reptilian staring back, something patient and hungry and not entirely human. But I'm fighting it. Writing this account is my way of fighting it, of warning people to stay away from that hollow and its patient guardians. Maybe if I can resist long enough, the transformation will stop. Maybe I can still be saved. Or maybe this is just another form of feeding, another way to draw people to the mountain. Maybe by reading this, by following my directions to Devil's Throat Hollow, you're already doing exactly what the whispers want you to do. Either way, I had to try to warn you, even if it might already be too late.